She had everything money could buy, and nothing that actually mattered. Vanessa Hart, 30 years old, worth $4 billion, hadn't left her mansion in 5 years. Not because she was afraid, because the world had made it very clear what it thought of a woman in a wheelchair trying to run a $1 billion empire. Then one rainy morning, a locket hit the floor. Dozens of people froze. Some looked away. Some offered the kind of smile that was really just pity wearing a costume. One man didn't. He just picked it up, handed it back, and walked away like it was nothing. It wasn't nothing. It changed everything. What? If this story already has you hooked, hit that like button right now and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Let's go. Part 1. The rain had been falling since before dawn. By 7 in the morning, Seattle was doing what Seattle always did in November, sitting under a sky the color of old concrete, leaking cold water onto everything and everyone foolish enough to be outside. The streets around the Harrington Convention Center were slick and dark, puddles spreading across the sidewalks, umbrellas bumping into each other at the entrance as people shuffled inside to get out of the wet. The Harrington was one of those buildings that tried very hard to look important. Marble floors, soaring ceilings, staff in pressed uniforms standing near the doors with the practiced expressions of people paid to look pleasant, no matter what. The annual Morrison Foundation Charity Gala drew Seattle's wealthiest residents every November, and this year was no different. The parking lot was a slow parade of black cars and SUVs, valets moving quickly despite the rain, guests ducking inside with their collars raised and their heels clicking against wet stone. Most of them hadn't come for the cause. Most of them came because being seen at a Morrison event still meant something in this city. Vanessa Hart arrived at 7:42, 7 minutes later than she'd planned, which already put her in a bad mood. Her driver pulled the car as close to the entrance as the accessible lane allowed, and Vanessa sat in the back seat for a moment after he opened the door, doing the private calculation she did every time she had to enter a public space. Checking angles, noting distances, identifying the small hazards that most people never thought about because they didn't have to. A step up at the wrong place, a narrow corridor, a crowd that moved unpredictably and had no idea it was in anyone's way. The chair was already unfolded on the sidewalk, the driver holding it steady. She transferred herself out of the car with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this thousands of times and had long since stopped needing anyone to help. The movement was fluid and completely unsentimental. She didn't want help. She'd made that clear repeatedly to enough people over enough years that most of her staff had learned to simply be present without hovering. She pushed herself toward the entrance. The automatic doors opened. A young woman in a Morrison Foundation blazer materialized immediately with the expression Vanessa recognized. The big careful smile, the slightly lowered posture, the particular kind of over-attention that people sometimes confused with warmth. "Ms. Hart, welcome. We have your table ready, and we've arranged—" "I know where the table is," Vanessa said. Her voice was not unkind, but it was not soft either. "Thank you." The woman blinked, recalibrated, stepped back. "Of course. Right this way." Inside, the Harrington's main hall had been transformed. Round tables with white linens filled most of the floor, centerpieces of white roses and small battery-powered candles catching the light. A low stage had been erected at the far end, a podium with the Morrison Foundation's logo, screens showing images of their work. Children in schools, community centers, medical clinics. The room smelled like cut flowers and expensive cologne, and the particular warmth of too many well-dressed people gathered indoors out of the rain. Vanessa had been to events like this for most of her adult life. She'd been to them before the accident, and she'd been to a few carefully selected ones after, and they still felt the same to her, full of people performing generosity for an audience of each other. She was not especially charitable about this. She was aware that she was doing the same thing. Her table was positioned near the center of the room, which was better than the back, but worse than she'd preferred. She'd asked for a spot closer to the wall, where the approach was clear, and she didn't have to navigate through people. Someone had apparently decided that a visible position was more appropriate for someone of her profile. She'd have words about that later. She settled at her table, nodded to the two members of her team who were already seated, and accepted a glass of water from a passing server. The program was still 40 minutes from starting. There was a period of standing around and mingling that was expected of everyone before the formal part of the evening, and Vanessa had developed a tolerance for it that stopped well short of enjoyment. Margaret Chu, her chief of staff, leaned over. Margaret was 53, efficient in the way of someone who had organized complicated lives for complicated people for over 2 decades, and she had the particular gift of saying useful things quietly. Harrison wants to speak with you before the program, she said. He's been hovering near the bar for about 20 minutes. Tell him I'll speak to him after, Vanessa said. If he comes over before, remind him we're in public and I'd prefer not to have that conversation here. And if he ignores that, then I'll handle it. Margaret made a small note on her tablet and said nothing else, which was one of the reasons Vanessa kept her around. Harrison was Richard Harrison, one of 4 executives at Hart Industries who had, over the past 3 months, been conducting what they apparently believed was a subtle campaign to question Vanessa's fitness to lead the company. They had been maneuvering through back channels, quiet meetings with board members, carefully worded emails that said nothing directly and implied everything. Vanessa had known about it for 6 weeks. She had not yet decided exactly how to respond, which was itself a kind of decision, watching, mapping the shape of it, understanding who exactly was involved before she moved. She did not appreciate Harrison choosing a public event for whatever conversation he thought he needed to have, but that was a problem she'd address later. The room was filling up now. The sound level was rising. The specific blur of 200 conversations happening simultaneously, silverware on glassware, shoes on marble, the low current of a string quartet, trying to be heard without being listened to. Vanessa recognized faces from across the room. The Moreland family near the windows. The Abbotts, both of them, looking tanned from somewhere. Paul Vega from the Chamber of Commerce, working the room the way he always did, handshake to handshake. Then she noticed something different. Near the entrance to the hall, where the overflow crowd was still coming in out of the rain, there was a cluster of people who didn't quite fit the profile of the evening. Families, mostly. The Morrison Foundation apparently invited a number of community partners every year. People from the organizations they funded, recipients of grants, volunteers. They came dressed in what was clearly their best, moving carefully through the space, taking in the room with the particular awareness of people who understood they were guests of a certain kind. Among them was a man, early 30s, in a navy blazer that didn't quite fit across the shoulders. He was holding the hand of a small girl, maybe 6, maybe 7, who was looking up at everything with the total unselfconscious wonder that young children bring to rooms they've never been in before. She was wearing a dress that was clearly new, red plaid with a white collar, and she had her hair in 2 uneven braids that suggested her father had done them himself and done his best. Vanessa wasn't sure why she noticed them. She noticed a lot of things. It was a habit born of years of having to pay attention to everything in a room while appearing to pay attention to nothing. But there was something about the pair of them that was distinct in that crowd, not dramatic, just present in a different way than everyone else. The girl pointed at the centerpieces and said something to her father. He bent down to listen, then laughed and shook his head and said something back. She laughed too. It was a private joke in a public room, the two of them in their own small world, and it had nothing to do with anyone watching. Vanessa looked away. She had a program to review. The mingling portion of the evening was, as expected, an exercise in maintaining expressions of polite interest through conversations she had largely heard before. 3 people asked her how she was doing in the way that meant they were asking about the wheelchair, and not really about her. She answered in the way she always answered, "Fine, thank you," and moved on before they could push further. 2 investors found their way to her table with what they called just wanting to check in, and she fielded their concerns about the company's direction with the clipped precision of someone who had been navigating boardroom anxieties since she was 26 years old. Harrison did not approach. She noticed him twice across the room, watching her with the expression of a man calculating something. She ate very little of the dinner, which was the usual charity gala food, competent, expensive, forgettable. The speeches were what they were. The foundation's director talked for 12 minutes about their work in underserved communities. A recipient of their education grant spoke briefly and genuinely and was, predictably, the best part of the evening. Vanessa contributed a modest donation, as she did every year, and noted with detached interest that her name would be in the program and that this was the point. It was near the end of the formal program, when the room was loosening again, people standing, dessert plates being cleared, conversations resumed, that it happened. She was moving away from her table, toward the edge of the room where there was more space and fewer people crowding the paths. She had the locket in her hand. She often took it out without quite realizing she was doing it, the way people reach for certain habits under stress. It had been her mother's. Small, silver, oval, the kind of thing that looked ordinary until you knew what it was, and then it looked like the most specific object in any room you put it in. She'd had it for 15 years. She'd never lost it. Her wheel caught the edge of a slightly raised seam in the marble floor, an imperfection she hadn't clocked, hadn't mapped, hadn't prepared for. And the chair stuttered, just a small jolt. Enough. The locket slipped from her fingers. She heard it hit the floor before she saw it. A small, clear sound, almost inaudible in the noise of the room, but she heard it the way you hear the things that matter. It spun and settled, maybe 4 feet in front of her on the marble. 4 feet. She couldn't reach it. The angle was wrong. The distance was wrong. The physics of it were simply wrong. She could not bend that far forward safely without risking tipping the chair, and there was nothing nearby to brace against. She sat looking at it. Around her, people registered what had happened at different speeds. A woman nearby looked down, looked at Vanessa, looked at the locket, and then looked somewhere else very deliberately. A man in a tuxedo half moved toward it, caught himself, seemed to worry about something. Maybe about drawing attention, maybe about doing it wrong, maybe about the optics of bending down in front of a woman in a wheelchair at a charity gala, and went still. 2 more people simply adjusted their path around the locket without stopping. A server noticed but had a tray in both hands and kept walking. Vanessa watched all of this. She was not surprised by it. She had learned, a long time ago, that most people freeze when they're in proximity to something they don't know how to handle, and a woman in a wheelchair losing something on the floor apparently fell into that category. People didn't want to get it wrong. They didn't want to be patronizing, or they were afraid of acknowledging the chair, or they were embarrassed on her behalf in a way that made them useless. She understood the psychology. It still made her very, very tired. She was calculating whether she could get to a wall and brace against it to increase her reach when she heard the small voice. "Daddy, someone dropped something." And then, no pause, no deliberation, no performance, a man crouched down next to the locket. He picked it up. He looked at it briefly, just to confirm it was intact, and then he walked the 3 steps to Vanessa's side and held it out. "Here you go," he said. That was it. No added drama, no look of deep significance, no careful management of where his eyes went, no overcorrection, no particular gentleness. That was really just a different form of condescension. He just held it out and met her eyes like a person talking to another person. It was so ordinary that it took her a second to respond. She took the locket from his hand. "Thank you." "Sure." He straightened up. His daughter was right next to him, looking at the locket with frank curiosity. "Is it a real locket?" the girl asked. "Like with pictures inside?" "Lily," the man said mildly. "It's fine," Vanessa said. She looked at the girl. "Yes. There's a photo inside." "Of who?" "Lily." "My mother," Vanessa said. The girl nodded seriously, as if this was information she was filing away. "My mom's gone too," she said. "Mine doesn't have a locket, though. Mine has—" She paused, looking at her father, calculating the word. "A legacy box with stuff in it." "Lily, it's for when I want to remember her. Dad made it." Vanessa looked at the man. He had the expression of a parent caught somewhere between embarrassment and the decision to let it go because stopping it would be worse. He had brown eyes and a face that looked like it had been tired for a while and had made its peace with that. The blazer that didn't fit right, the braids that weren't quite even. She noticed that his shoes were clean, very clean, clearly polished, which was the detail that for some reason stayed with her. "That sounds like a good thing to have," Vanessa said to the girl. The girl nodded, apparently satisfied. Then she looked at the wheelchair with exactly the curiosity she'd looked at the locket with and said, "Does that have a motor?" "Not this one," Vanessa said. "Some of them do. Could you go really fast if it did?" "Faster than you might think." Lily seemed to find this extremely acceptable information. Her father put a light hand on her shoulder and said, "We should go find our seats, Bug." "We're already done sitting." "We should go find them anyway." He looked at Vanessa. Not with pity, not with excessive warmth, not with anything except the ordinary civility of 2 people who have had a small interaction and are about to part. "Take care," he said. "You too," she said. And they walked away. The girl's voice floated back as they moved through the crowd, already on to the next subject, something about the flowers, whether they were real or fake, and how you could tell the difference if you looked closely at the petals. Vanessa sat with the locket in her hand. She didn't move for almost a full minute. That night, back at the mansion, she sat in the room she used as a study when she couldn't sleep, which was often, and held the locket and thought about why that exchange was still in her head. It was a small thing. She knew it was a small thing. A man had picked up a dropped object and handed it back. People did that every day, but they hadn't done it tonight. Not for several long seconds that felt longer than they were. And when one person finally had, he'd done it without making it into anything. She set the locket down on the desk and looked out at the rain, which was still going. Seattle was stubborn about its rain. November meant weeks of it, the kind that didn't commit to being dramatic, just settled in and persisted. The mansion was quiet. It was always quiet. It had been quiet for 5 years since she'd moved back in after the accident and the rehab and the long period of reconfiguring everything. The spaces, the routines, the way she moved through the world. She had staff, people who came and went during the day. But by evening, the house was hers alone, and she'd told herself for a long time that this was by choice and not by circumstance. Sometimes she believed that. She opened her laptop and checked the company reports that Margaret had sent over earlier, because work was the thing that kept the quiet from becoming something heavier. Hart Industries had been her father's company before it was hers, and she had spent 15 years turning it from a solid regional firm into something that mattered on a national level. She'd done it through the kind of singular focus that people called visionary when they liked you and obsessive when they didn't. She'd been 25 when she took over, 28 when they started taking her seriously, 30 when the accident happened. The accident was not something she talked about in detail, even now. The publicly available version was that there had been a car crash on a wet road outside Portland. The car had rolled. The driver, a business associate, not her driver, she'd been a passenger, had survived with minor injuries. She had not. Spinal cord damage, incomplete, T10 level. The doctors had been honest about what that meant, and she had appreciated the honesty even though it had taken time to know what to do with it. She'd spent the first 8 months in facilities. Rehab, adjustment, learning. Then she'd come home. And then, gradually, she'd pulled the world inward around her, until the space she moved through had contracted to the mansion and the company and the careful routes she'd mapped between them. The charity event tonight was one of only a handful of public engagements she'd accepted in the past year. Margaret had been quietly advocating for more visibility, and Vanessa had been quietly resistant, and they'd reached a compromise that satisfied neither of them entirely, which was perhaps the definition of a functional working relationship. She set the laptop aside and picked up the locket again. She thought about the girl's voice. "My mom's gone too," said the way children sometimes say the most significant things, directly, without the softening that adults learn to apply, not because they don't feel it, but because they haven't yet learned to be afraid of saying it plainly. She thought about the man, the blazer, the braids. Take care. 2 words, and he'd meant them as nothing more or less than they were. She set the locket down, opened her laptop, told herself she was not going to try to find out who he was. She closed the laptop, sat in the quiet for a while. Then she opened it again. It didn't take long. She had access to the Morrison Foundation's guest list through her foundation liaison, and from there it took 15 minutes to cross-reference names against the community partner organizations. The man's name was Ryan Carter, 32 years old. He'd come as a representative of the Eastside Community Building Coalition, a volunteer organization that worked on neighborhood infrastructure projects, fixing up community centers, building accessible ramps, running maintenance programs for lower-income housing. He worked 3 jobs. She found that through a more indirect route, a combination of professional networking profiles and a local newspaper feature from 2 years ago that had covered the coalition's work. In the article, Ryan Carter was quoted twice, and the writer had mentioned in passing that he held a full-time position in building maintenance, worked weekend shifts doing delivery, and volunteered with the coalition in what time remained. The article had not found this especially remarkable, and Ryan Carter had not presented it as remarkable, which was its own kind of information. His wife, Emily Carter, had died 3 years ago. The article mentioned her only in the context of the coalition's work, noting that Ryan had joined after losing her. It said no more than that, and Vanessa did not go looking for more. The daughter was named Lily, 6 years old. She was in first grade at a school in the Renton area, which was where they lived, in what looked like a small rental house based on the Street View image. She pulled up and then immediately felt strange about pulling up and closed without really looking at. She sat back from the laptop. This was not what she normally did. She was not by nature someone who developed curiosity about strangers. She was someone who operated at a distance, who kept people in the appropriate professional or social category and did not go looking for more information than was necessary. She was good at this. She'd been doing it for years. But she sat there in the quiet study at 2 in the morning with the rain against the windows and the locket on the desk, and she thought about a man who'd picked something up without hesitation while everyone around him stood still, and about a little girl with uneven braids who talked about her mother like it was a fact she'd learned to live inside. She closed the laptop, went to bed, did not sleep especially well. She thought about it more than she wanted to over the following days. The Harrison problem demanded her attention, and she gave it. She had a meeting with the company's general counsel that lasted 3 hours and covered the legal parameters of a potential board challenge. She had 2 calls with members of the board she trusted, carefully worded conversations that accomplished more than they appeared to. She reviewed every internal communication she could access and found 3 more names she'd suspected but not confirmed. The work helped. It always helped. Vanessa had built her entire adult life on the principle that work was the most reliable form of structure available, that problems could be broken down into components, and those components could be addressed systematically, and that this approach worked for most things if applied consistently enough. It worked for the Harrison problem. It was less successful with the other thing. The thing she kept telling herself was not worth her attention. She ran her company, read her reports, held her meetings, and thought about Ryan Carter and the way he'd looked at her like she was just a person. She knew the exact shape of the problem with that. The last time someone had looked at her that way, completely ordinarily, without adjustment or special consideration, she had been 29 years old, still walking, in a life that was different enough from her current one that it felt like it belonged to someone else. After the accident, the dynamic had shifted. People tried. Most of them genuinely tried. But there was always a quality to the adjustment that she could sense, a slight recalibration, a care that revealed itself in the very effort to conceal it. People were looking at her differently, and they were also trying not to look at her differently, and both things were visible if you watched for them. She watched for them constantly. She had become very good at it. Ryan Carter had not done any of that. He just handed her the locket, and then his daughter had asked about it with the complete directness of a child who doesn't know she's supposed to behave differently. And the whole exchange had lasted maybe 4 minutes, and she was still thinking about it a week later. She didn't like that. She liked things she could categorize and set aside. She asked Margaret, in a way she tried to make sound administrative, whether the Morrison Foundation Gala had documented its community partners' contact information. Margaret looked at her with the expression of someone who had learned to notice things without commenting on them directly. "I believe they do," she said. "Are we looking to engage with any of the organizations?" "The coalition," Vanessa said. "The East Side building people. Pull their information." "Of course," Margaret said, and made a note, and did not say anything else. The second encounter was not engineered. That was important to Vanessa afterward. She had pulled the coalition's information, yes, and she had looked at their upcoming volunteer events, and she had perhaps arranged her Saturday morning in a way that made it plausible she would be in the Renton area. But she had not planned to run into him. The farmers' market ran along a 2-block stretch of a Renton neighborhood on Saturday mornings, late October through early December, under a series of canvas tents. Vanessa had come for the specific purpose of looking at an accessible building project the coalition had completed on the adjacent block, a ramp installation for a community library that she'd read about in their materials, and found herself genuinely curious about the construction approach. She was examining the corner join of the ramp structure, which was better engineered than she'd expected, when she heard a voice she recognized. "The grade is supposed to be under 1 to 12, but it ended up a little steeper on the south side. We've been trying to get the measurements fixed for about 2 weeks." She looked up. Ryan Carter was standing 6 feet away, talking to a man in a high-visibility vest, holding a coffee cup and a folded piece of paper that appeared to be a diagram. He hadn't seen her yet. She almost left. It would have been the easier thing. She stayed where she was, and a moment later he turned and saw her, and his expression was the face of someone trying to place something they recognize but haven't quite located. Then he had it. "The locket," he said. "The ramp," she said. That surprised him. He glanced at the man in the vest, said something brief, and then walked over. "You're looking at our ramp," he said. Not accusatory, just noting it. "The corner join is well done," she said. "Better than most contracted work I've seen." He looked at the join like he was seeing it again. That was a lot of back and forth. The contractor wanted to do it the standard way, and I kept pushing for something that would hold up better through winter. The standard way would have cracked by February. He looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "That's what I said." Something in his expression adjusted. Not the recalibration she was used to reading in people when they spoke to her, but something more like the particular attention of someone recognizing they're talking to a person who knows what they're talking about. You work in construction? No, but I've had reason to learn about ramp specifications. A beat. He understood what she meant, and he moved on from it without making it a moment. Ryan Carter. I know, she said. Vanessa Hart. That one he recognized. Something moved across his face. He knew the name, clearly, but he controlled it quickly, and what settled was something closer to the same easy attention as before. Not quite, but closer. You were at the gala, he said, and you were at the ramp. He smiled. It was not a polished smile. It was the smile of a person who was slightly more tired than they looked and who had just been surprised by something in a good way. Lily's in there, he said, gesturing at the market tents. She talked about the Locket for 3 days. Only 3? She moved on to an extended thing about penguins. No offense. None taken. He glanced back toward the market, then back at her. He had the posture of someone who was used to moving quickly between tasks, always aware of the next thing, but he wasn't rushing now. Do you want to... He started. There's good coffee 2 tents down. If you weren't... I'm not trying to... He stopped himself. Coffee, he said, more simply. Vanessa had said no to things like this. Casual, unstructured, undefined things. For 5 years. It was what she did. Her social world had contracted to people who served a function, and she'd told herself this was efficiency. I have 15 minutes, she said. The 15 minutes became an hour and 10. Lily found them at the coffee tent about 20 minutes in, announcing herself by arriving suddenly at the table with a paper cup of hot chocolate and the information that she had seen a dog who was bigger than she was, and his name was Gerald. That's a good name for a big dog, Vanessa said. It is, Lily agreed, climbing into the empty chair beside her father with the physical certainty of a child who does not question whether there is room for her. Did you bring the locket? Lily, I have it, Vanessa said. She reached into her jacket pocket and produced it. She set it on the table. Lily looked at it with the same focused interest she'd had at the gala. Can I see inside? Vanessa opened it. Inside was a small photograph, creased at the corner, a woman's face, dark-haired, early 40s, laughing at something off camera. She's pretty, Lily said. She was, Vanessa said. Lily looked at the photo a moment longer, then looked up. My mom was pretty too, she said. I have pictures, and her handwriting. Dad saved it on cards. She looked at her father. For the legacy box. Ryan was looking at his coffee. Yeah, he said. He cleared his throat. We should probably not get into all of this. It's fine, Vanessa said. It's fine, Lily confirmed. Ryan looked at both of them, outvoted. He had the expression of a man getting used to this dynamic. The conversation moved. Lily contributed observations at intervals, about the market, about her teacher, about Gerald the dog, and the adults talked around and through these contributions in a way that started to feel natural faster than Vanessa expected. She learned that Ryan had been with the coalition for 2.5 years, that he'd started by showing up to help with a project near his apartment and found he was good at it, and that being good at it felt like something during a period when not many other things did. He said this plainly, without the particular caution of someone performing emotional openness. He just said it. She told him about the accessibility work she'd been loosely thinking about at the company, the initiative that was still at the stage of being an idea she hadn't fully committed to. She hadn't talked about it outside of one brief mention to Margaret. She wasn't sure why she said it now. He asked questions about it that were practical and direct. Not the flattery of someone impressed by the concept, but the curiosity of someone who thought about these problems from the ground up. He mentioned 3 structural issues with most corporate accessibility programs that she hadn't considered from that angle. She looked at him. Have you worked in policy? No, he said, just building ramps. Same thing sometimes. He almost smiled. Not really. More than you think. Lily had finished her hot chocolate and was now drawing something on a napkin, apparently unconcerned with the adult conversation. After a moment, she held up the napkin, showing a wobbly oval shape. That's the locket, she said. I'm drawing it for the memory box. Ryan looked at it. Good locket, Bug. I know, she said, already drawing again. Vanessa sat in the noise of the market. Vendors calling prices. Someone playing guitar, 2 tents over, rain starting again at the edges of the canvas, and felt something that took her a moment to name. It was not happiness exactly. It was more like the absence of something she'd gotten used to carrying, set down briefly without quite noticing. She noticed it now. She said she had to go. She meant it this time. Ryan walked her to where her car was parked, not offering to push, which she noticed and did not comment on, and they paused at the driver's door. The coalition posts their projects online, he said, if you ever want to look at specific site work. It was not asking for anything. It was just an open door left there, with no particular expectation attached. I'll look, she said. She got into the car. She did not look back as she drove out of the parking lot. She looked at the locket where she'd left it on the seat beside her. She thought about the napkin drawing, the wobbly oval. I'm drawing it for the memory box. She thought about the man who built ramps and worked 3 jobs and saved his wife's handwriting on cards for their daughter, who had picked up a locket without hesitation and handed it back and treated it like it cost him nothing, because for him, it hadn't. Outside, the rain was picking up. Seattle settling in for a long afternoon. Vanessa drove home through it. The mansion was the same when she returned, large, quiet, everything in its designated place. She parked the locket on the desk in the study, in the spot it always occupied. She sat for a moment in the empty room. Then she opened her laptop and pulled up the coalition's website, because she'd said she would look. And Vanessa Hart, when she said she would do something, did it. The project's page loaded. 7 active sites listed. Site photographs showing work in progress. Ramps, handrails, widened doorways. The unglamorous machinery of making the physical world accommodating to the people it too often forgot. She read through all of them. Then she read through them again. The coalition's website stayed open on her laptop for 3 days. She told herself she was researching. It wasn't entirely untrue. Vanessa had a habit of thorough information gathering that predated the accident and had, if anything, intensified afterward. When you couldn't always move through the world to see things directly, you learned to read everything available and compensate. She read the project reports, the grant applications, the site assessment forms that Ryan's team uploaded with the kind of functional, unself-conscious writing of people who documented things because documentation was useful, not because anyone was watching. The prose was utilitarian. The photographs were taken with phones, slightly tilted, lit by whatever light was available. A ramp in progress. A doorway widening. Someone standing in a half-finished corridor with a level, not looking at the camera. Ryan appeared in 3 of the photographs. In one, he was on his knees examining a threshold join, hands dirty, attention entirely on the material in front of him. In another, he was talking to an older woman at what appeared to be a site walkthrough, bent slightly toward her because she was shorter, listening with the expression of someone who was actually listening. The third one was blurrier. Someone had caught him mid-laugh at what seemed to be a coalition workday lunch, the kind of photo that happens by accident and captures something the posed ones never do. Vanessa closed the laptop on the 3rd day and did not open the coalition's page again for a week. This was progress, she decided. What she did instead was work. The Harrison situation had developed in ways that required her full attention, and she gave it. 2 more board members had been pulled into quiet conversations by Richard Harrison and his allies. She'd confirmed this through a contact on the audit committee who owed her a favor and had chosen to honor it. The picture was becoming clearer. Harrison wanted a proxy vote, organized quickly enough that she wouldn't have time to fully mobilize, framed around concerns about the company's strategic direction. The disability angle wouldn't be stated directly. Harrison was too careful for that. But it would be the current running under everything, the real argument made in rooms she wasn't in. She'd been in this company for 15 years. She'd built more of it than she could precisely account for, because so much of it had accumulated over time. Decisions made at 2 in the morning, relationships built across years, instincts developed by being wrong and being less wrong and adjusting again. The idea that Harrison, who had been at Hart Industries for 6 years, who had come in through an acquisition and positioned himself carefully and built a coalition out of people who were nervous about the future. The idea that he believed he understood this company better than she did was not something she found credible. What she found credible was that he was scared of instability and had decided she was the instability. That was a more dangerous kind of wrong than simple ignorance. She worked. She made calls she didn't announce. She had conversations with board members that were not about the vote and were also entirely about it. She was careful. She was always careful. And underneath the work, occupying the small hours of the night when the careful analysis gave way to whatever came after it, she thought about what Ryan had said at the coffee tent. I started showing up to help with a project near my apartment and found I was good at it. And being good at it felt like something during a period when not many other things did. She'd heard a lot of people talk about grief and recovery and rebuilding. She'd been to the sessions, the therapists, the support groups that well-meaning people had recommended in the first year after the accident. Everyone had language for it. Some of the language was even useful. But there was a specific quality to the way Ryan had said that. Plainly, without architecture, like it was just a thing that had happened, that she kept returning to. The absence of performance. He wasn't telling her a story about himself. He was just answering a question honestly. She wasn't used to that. The third time their paths crossed, she didn't pretend it was accident. Margaret had flagged that the coalition was holding a public walkthrough of a newly completed accessibility project, a retrofitted community center in the South End neighborhood, a building that had been, according to the project documentation, essentially unusable for anyone with mobility limitations before the renovations. The walkthrough was open to community members, funders, and interested parties. The Morrison Foundation was listed as a project sponsor. She told Margaret she wanted to attend in a professional capacity, as a potential funder evaluating the coalition's work. Margaret wrote this down with the exact expression she used when she was being professionally discreet. "I'll arrange it," Margaret said. The community center was a converted warehouse from the 70s, brick exterior, the kind of building that accumulates character through decades of being used hard. The renovations had retained that quality. This was not a building that had been made to look new. It had been made to work better. Wider corridors. An elevator that hadn't existed before, housed in a small addition at the north end. Ramp access at 3 separate entrances. Interior surfaces changed at the margins, handrails added, lighting improved without being transformed. It still looked like itself, just more accessible to itself. Vanessa moved through it at her own pace, ahead of the main group because she needed to actually see things. And that meant being able to stop and look without the crowd's rhythm determining hers. She examined the elevator threshold. Well done, flush, no lip. The corridor width at the main junction, adequate but tight in the left branch. The entrance ramp gradient, correct this time, not the slight overage of the Renton Library. She had been there about 20 minutes when Ryan appeared from a side corridor with a clipboard talking to a woman in a hard hat. He saw Vanessa, finished his sentence, and walked over. "You came," he said. "You did the work," she said. It seemed worth seeing. He looked around the corridor with the expression of someone who had been looking at something so long they couldn't quite see it fresh anymore. The elevator was the hardest part. The building's structure didn't want to cooperate. The corridor on the left branch is tight, 28 inches. We couldn't get it wider without taking down a load-bearing element. Technically meets code. "Technically," she said. "Yeah." He tapped the clipboard against his palm. "I know." This was what she hadn't expected about talking to him, that he didn't need her to be diplomatic about things he already knew were imperfect. He registered the observation and held it without defensiveness. It was the quality of someone who'd been fixing things long enough to understand that knowing the problem and being able to solve it weren't always the same situation, and both deserved to be named. "The entrance ramp is right," she said. "We did that one twice." "I could tell." He looked at her. That small adjustment in his expression again. Not quite a smile, something more like recognition. "Where did you learn ramp gradients?" "From needing them to be correct," she said, "and from being angry enough times when they weren't to actually study the specifications." He absorbed this. Then, "Most people in your position hire someone else to be angry for them." "I tried that. They weren't angry enough." He did smile then. It rearranged his face in a way that took a few years off it. He looked less like a man carrying something and more like the man he probably was before the carrying started. She noticed this and filed it away in the category of things she was noticing too much. "Lily asked if you were going to come back," he said, more carefully. Vanessa wasn't sure what to do with that, so she didn't do anything immediately. She looked at the elevator door. "She's perceptive." "She's 6, he said. "She just says what she's thinking. That's what perceptive means, usually." He considered this. "She talks about the locket a lot. I think she feels—" He paused. "I think it makes her feel like a connection or something, to her mom, through your mom. I don't fully understand the logic, but she's 6, so—" "The logic is that 2 women are gone and something small survived them both," Vanessa said. "That makes sense to me." Ryan was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said finally. "That's probably it." The walkthrough group had caught up to them and was moving through the corridor now, the organizer explaining the ramp approach to a cluster of community members. Ryan stepped back to let them pass, and Vanessa moved with him, and they ended up side by side against the wall watching other people move through the space that he and his team had built. "Can I ask you something?" he said. You've been managing not to, she said. Since the coffee, he admitted. You said you've been thinking about an accessibility program through the company. I said I had an idea at the stage of not being fully committed to it. What would it take to get committed to it? She looked at him. This was not the question she'd expected, which meant she needed to actually think about the answer rather than giving the one she had prepared. Knowing it would work, she said. Not theoretically, practically. That the infrastructure exists to make it real and not just an announcement. He nodded slowly. Because announcements are easy. They're very easy, and they feel like doing something while actually doing almost nothing. The coalition's gotten a lot of those, he said. It was not bitter, just accurate. Companies that come in for a photo and then the follow through is 2% of what they said. I know. She looked back at the elevator. That's why I haven't committed to it. I don't want to be that. He was quiet again. Not the quiet of someone with nothing to say, but the kind that was making room for something. If you ever wanted to see what actual ground level implementation looks like, he said. Not for a photo. Just to see the work. He shrugged. We have 3 active sites right now. She looked at him. He met it without making it anything complicated. Send me the site information, she said, through the coalition's contact page. You want it formal? I want it documented. If I'm going to make a decision, I want a record of the information I made it from. He thought about this. That's very systematic. Is that a problem? No, he said. It's just different. He pushed off from the wall. I'll send it today. She moved toward the exit, then stopped, turned back. Lily's napkin drawing, she said. Did she actually put it in the memory box? Ryan blinked. Then something shifted in his face that she couldn't read precisely, except that it was real. Yeah, he said. She did. Vanessa nodded once, continued to the exit. Outside, the November air was cold and the sky was the specific flat gray of an afternoon that wasn't going to get any better before dark. She sat in her car for a moment before calling her driver, looking at the community center's exterior. The brick. The new ramp. The small addition housing the elevator that the building's structure hadn't wanted to give up. You built things in the space available, she thought. That was not inspiration. It was just what the work required. The site information came that afternoon, as he said it would. 3 attachments. Project summaries, site photographs, current status reports. The emails were written the same way the coalition's project documents were written, functional and direct, without flourish. Ryan had not added anything personal to the message. It was exactly what she'd asked for. She forwarded everything to Margaret with a note. I want to look at these seriously. Clear time, Thursday afternoon. Margaret forwarded back 30 seconds later. Already done. She did not think about what this meant. She thought about Thursday. Thursday was a site in the Beacon Hill neighborhood, a small apartment complex that the coalition was working to retrofit with exterior ramp access. The existing entrance involved 3 steps that had no alternative approach, which meant that the 12 units in the building, 12 families, had been effectively inaccessible to anyone with mobility limitations since the building was constructed in the 1960s. Ryan walked her through the current plan. He had a clipboard, as before, and a habit of sketching things quickly on graph paper when he needed to explain structural decisions. His hands moved like someone used to working with physical materials, gesturing in the air to indicate angles and distances that he'd apparently memorized. The challenge is the grade of the existing approach, he said, crouching to show her the current path from sidewalk to entrance. There's a 4-foot elevation change over about 15 feet, which gives us the gradient problem if we run a standard ramp from the front. You'd need to switchback it, she said, which requires more footprint than we have on the front approach. He sketched something. So we're proposing to come around the north side, use a longer run along the building face, and enter at the existing side door that's already at grade. It's a 40-foot route instead of 15, but compliant. And usable, which is the part the code doesn't always ask about. She sat and looked at the side of the building. The existing side door was metal, painted over many times, functional without being welcoming. It had a worn concrete path leading to it that people already used, which was a point in the plan's favor. What's the timeline? 6 weeks if the materials come in on schedule. 8 if they don't. He sat back on his heels. Materials usually don't. What's the budget shortfall? He looked at her. We're about 14,000 short of what we need for this site. We have what covers the ramp structure, but not the door modification and the path resurfacing. Send me the itemized budget. He stared at her for a second. Vanessa. I'm not committing anything, she said. I said send me the numbers. He considered this. Then he wrote something on the graph paper, tore it off, handed it to her. It was a number. That's a rough total for the door and path work, he said. I can get you the full breakdown by end of week. She folded the paper, put it in her jacket pocket. End of week is fine. He watched her do this with an expression she couldn't immediately classify. You know, he said, most people who say they want to evaluate something real don't actually show up to the sites. I noticed, she said. That's why I came. They were quiet for a moment. A car passed on the street behind them. Somewhere in the building, someone was playing music. Muffled through the wall, a bass line, and something she couldn't identify. How long have you been doing this? She asked. Not the coalition specifically. He understood what she meant. Working everything I can work? He thought about it. Since Emily died. Before that I had one job and it was enough. He stopped. After, the time was the problem. The silence of time with nothing in it. He picked up a small piece of gravel and turned it over in his fingers, then set it down. Lily helped. She needed things constantly, and that was good. But when she was in bed and the apartment was quiet, you need something to put in the quiet. Work was what I had. She understood this so directly and completely that she didn't say so, because saying so would make it into something it didn't need to be. Does it get easier? She asked instead. The quiet. He looked at her, and this time he understood the real shape of the question, which was not about him. Different, he said. Not easier. It just starts to have different things in it. She looked at the building, the side door, the path that people had worn into the concrete over 60 years, not because it was the best route, but because it was the one that existed. Different things, she said. Yeah. The itemized budget came Friday. She reviewed it Saturday. She transferred the funding to the coalition's account Monday morning before her 7 o'clock call, with a note that it was for the Beacon Hill site specifically and not to be applied elsewhere without conversation. She did not announce it. She told Margaret it had happened because Margaret needed to know, and Margaret made a note and said, "Good," in the tone she used when she thought something was overdue and didn't say so. Ryan sent a one-line email that afternoon. Lily wants to know if you want to see the finished ramp when it's done. She looked at the email for longer than it deserved. She wrote back, "Tell Lily yes." December came in with more rain and a cold that had weight to it, the kind that pushed through the margins of buildings and made people hold their coffee cups with both hands. Vanessa's schedule was dense. End of year required it, the company's annual review cycle overlapping with external partnership meetings and board communications, and the ongoing, carefully managed navigation of the Harrison situation. She saw Ryan twice more in December, both times in what she had to admit were partially constructed circumstances. Once at a coalition board meeting that she'd been invited to attend as a prospective funding partner. Once at a community forum about accessible infrastructure that she had genuine professional reasons to attend and also could have sent a representative to. Each time she saw him, the things she'd noted at the gala sharpened slightly. The quality of his attention, the directness of his engagement, the way he moved through rooms full of people without performing for any of them. He was not unaware of himself. She'd observed enough people to know the difference between someone who was simply unconscious of how they came across and someone who had worked out, somewhere along the way, that most performance was exhausting and unnecessary. Ryan was the second type. He'd made the decision, probably without articulating it as a decision, to just be what he was in whatever room he was in. It was, she realized, the quality that had registered in the first 4 seconds at the gala when he'd picked up the locket and handed it back. Not kindness exactly, though it was that. The absence of performance. In a room full of people who were all performing in varying degrees, the quality of a person who simply wasn't was immediately legible, and it still felt, weeks later, like something she needed to be careful with. She knew what it was doing, this incremental thing. She knew the way the mind worked when it was offered something it had been without for a long time. It wanted to make too much of it. It wanted to interpret every small exchange as larger than it was, to read meaning into things that might just be the ordinary patterns of two people who had crossed paths and were not yet finished crossing. She'd watched herself do this, carefully, and had tried to account for it. She hadn't succeeded very well. Lily was part of it, in a way that was separate and also not. The girl had appeared in Vanessa's life in the specific way that children sometimes appeared. Not carefully, not through any normal social mechanism, just suddenly present, saying things directly, offering her attention with no calculation behind it. Lily thought the locket was important and said so. Lily thought the locket and her mother's memory box were connected in some logic of objects and people who were gone, and she had said that too, to a stranger, without hesitation. Vanessa had not had much contact with children since the accident. She had not had much contact with children before it, if she was honest. She'd been 21 when her mother died, 22 when she'd joined the company, and the years since had been a continuous acceleration of professional life that left the corners of personal existence, the things that happened in the margins, the ordinary accumulations of relationship and place and time, mostly unfilled. She wasn't sure what she was doing with the small space that was opening up. She was just, for now, not closing it up. The Harrison situation moved faster than she'd anticipated. The board meeting she'd heard about through back channels was confirmed in the second week of December, formally scheduled for mid-January, listed on the agenda as a strategic review, but with the actual purpose barely concealed in the supplemental materials. Harrison had been more efficient than she'd credited. He'd spent months doing what she did, watching, waiting, counting votes. She sat with the formal notification for a while after it arrived. Margaret brought her coffee she hadn't asked for, set it on the desk, and sat down. "How bad?" she asked. "He has 4 votes confirmed," Vanessa said. "Possibly 5. He needs 7. Who's uncertain?" "Feldman, Park, possibly Reeves, though Reeves is unpredictable." She turned the notification over in her hands. He wouldn't have scheduled it unless he thought he had the numbers. "Does he?" She didn't answer right away. The honest answer was she wasn't sure, and she was not used to being unsure about the counts in her own boardroom. "He might," she said. Margaret sat with this. "What do you want to do?" It was a genuine question. Margaret asked it the way she asked all things, as if the answer wasn't obvious, as if there were real options, as if she was prepared for whichever direction came. Vanessa thought about the apartment complex in Beacon Hill, the side door, the path worn through decades of use. "I want to think about it," she said. "Give me the weekend." "You have the Coalition's site completion event Saturday," Margaret said. "I know. Lily's going to be there." "I know that too." Margaret stood, collecting her tablet. She paused at the door. "For what it's worth," she said, not quite looking back, "you've been different in the last 6 weeks. I don't know if that's relevant." "Different how?" "Less contained," Margaret said, and left it there. Saturday arrived with a brief break in the rain, the kind Seattle offered occasionally in December like a small apology for everything else. The Beacon Hill ramp was finished, 5 weeks into Ryan's 6-week estimate, which he had apparently viewed as a personal challenge to his own timeline rather than a conservative projection. The completion event was small. A few neighbors, the building manager, several coalition volunteers, a woman from the city's housing office who had been involved in approvals. Someone had brought a cake that said "open for everyone" in grocery store frosting, which was the right kind of cake for a ramp opening. Lily was wearing a winter coat that was slightly too big for her, clearly bought with the intention of growing into it, and she attached herself to Vanessa's side within approximately 90 seconds of her arrival with the straightforward confidence of a child who has decided on a friendship and considers the formalities complete. "They put a textured strip on the ramp," she informed Vanessa, "so you can feel where it starts." "I saw," Vanessa said. "Did you know that helps people who can't see very well too? Not just people in wheelchairs." "I did know that." "Dad told me," Lily said. "He says good design helps everyone, not just the person it's designed for." She considered this. "I wrote that down. For school." Vanessa looked at Ryan across the small gathering. He was talking to the building manager, a heavy-set man in his 60s, who had the look of someone genuinely moved by what was in front of him, maybe for the first time standing at his own front entrance, thinking about who hadn't been able to use it before and could now. Ryan caught her eye over the man's shoulder. A brief look. She looked back and something settled between them that she didn't name. "He's been working really hard," Lily said, following her gaze with the observational accuracy of a small person who noticed more than the adults around her realized. "He always works really hard, but lately he's been—" She paused, searching. "More awake." Vanessa looked at the girl. "More awake?" "Like when you've been tired for a long time and then something makes you not as tired." Lily pulled at a thread on her coat sleeve. "He started whistling again. He used to whistle, and then he stopped, and now he whistles again sometimes." She shrugged with the equanimity of a 6-year-old reporting a weather pattern. "I like it." Vanessa said nothing for a moment. Around them, someone was cutting the cake, which prompted a small movement of people toward the table, and Lily went with it, apparently considering the conversation complete. Ryan came over. His hands were in his pockets, and he had the posture of someone who was tired in the good way, the way you're tired after doing something that actually required something from you. Ramp looks right, Vanessa said. It is right. Not boasting, just confirming. The door surround came out better than I expected. The contractor had an idea about the frame mounting that I didn't think would work, and it did. You let someone else's idea work. He looked at her sideways. I'm not territorial. Most people with your level of stake in a project are. Most people waste a lot of time being territorial, he said. She considered this. The building manager was using the ramp now, just walking up it, testing the texture strip with his foot, testing the rail with his hand. Small actions with the quality of something practiced, already becoming familiar. There's going to be a board vote, she said. She hadn't planned to say it here. She hadn't planned to say it to him at all, necessarily, but it came out with the same quality that his things came out, plain, because plainness was efficient. He turned toward her slightly. The company? Someone inside thinks I can't run it anymore. They've been building a case for several months and now they've scheduled the vote. She looked at the building. It's about the wheelchair. Technically, it's about the company's strategic direction, but that's the argument underneath. He was quiet. Not the quiet of not knowing what to say. The quiet of knowing enough to not fill space before he was ready. What are you going to do? He asked. I don't know yet. That's not like, he said. And she realized he meant it as observation, not accusation. He'd been paying enough attention to know that she was not normally a person who answered questions that way. No, she said, it's not. The cake was producing small negotiations among the volunteers about equal slice distribution. Lily's voice was audible in the mix, evidently advocating for a particular corner piece with the focused intensity she applied to most things. She said, "You're more awake lately," Vanessa said. Ryan stopped. What? Lily. She said you stopped whistling for a while and now you've started again. Vanessa looked at him directly. She notices everything. He looked at his daughter across the gathering. Something moved through him that he wasn't bothering to conceal. A complicated, unguarded thing that was fond and sad and present all at once. She does, he said. She's been doing that since before she could talk. Just watching everything. She gets it from somewhere. He looked at Vanessa. The afternoon light was going flat and thin the way it did in December, and the cold was reasserting itself at the edges of the brief clear weather. His face was tired, and under the tiredness, something that had been quietly there for weeks, and that she had been quietly not naming. Vanessa, he said, and stopped. You don't have to, she said. I know. He looked at the ramp, at the building, at his daughter claiming the corner piece of cake. Whatever's going on with the board, whatever they think. He spoke carefully, with the tone of someone choosing words because they matter, not to make them sound better. They haven't seen what I've seen in the last 2 months. He shook his head slightly. Don't give that to them. She didn't answer immediately. The building manager was at the ramp again, watching a neighbor use it, an older woman with a cane who had apparently not been able to use this entrance for 3 years. The woman went up slowly, pausing at the midpoint, one hand on the rail that had not been there before. Vanessa watched this. The path that now existed where before there had only been steps. I haven't decided to give them anything, she said. Good, Ryan said. Lily appeared at his elbow with a plate containing a substantial corner piece of cake and the expression of someone who had competed for something and won it fairly. I got the one with the most frosting, she said, primarily to Vanessa, apparently considering this information she would want. You can have some if you want. Vanessa looked at the cake, then at Lily. Then, briefly, at Ryan, who was watching his daughter with the helpless, sustaining love of someone who has built their entire remaining life around a 6-year-old with uneven braids and excellent negotiation skills. All right, she said to Lily, which part has the most frosting? Lily pointed, very precisely, to the corner, and then she handed it over, just like that, no calculation. Vanessa ate the corner piece of someone else's cake at a ramp opening in December while around her the small good thing that Ryan Carter's team had built was being used for the first time, and she thought about board votes and silence, and the things that filled it, and about what it meant that a 6-year-old child had handed her the best piece without being asked, and without wanting anything back. The afternoon light was almost gone. The rain was coming back. She stayed until the cake was finished. The new year came in quietly. Vanessa spent the last week of December and the first days of January the way she spent most significant transitions, working, because work was the most reliable way she knew to move through time that otherwise had a tendency to expand into shapes she didn't want. She reviewed the company's annual financials with the precision she applied to everything, finding the three discrepancies that always existed in documents assembled by multiple departments and correcting them before anyone else noticed. She responded to communications she'd let accumulate through December. She had two calls with her legal team about the board meeting, now 3 weeks out, and came away from both with a clearer map of the terrain and no better sense of whether she was going to win. That was the part she couldn't model. She could count the confirmed votes on her side. She could estimate the uncertain ones. She could make the arguments she would need to make, had in fact been making them in various forms for weeks in her conversations with individual board members. But there was something underneath the counting that she couldn't resolve through analysis, something that had to do with the room itself. The particular quality of a boardroom when a decision is actually being made, the way people's faces changed in the seconds between holding a position and abandoning it, the intangible current that moved through a vote when it was close. She had won close votes before. She'd also lost them. The difference in her experience was not usually the arguments. The arguments were mostly constructed after the real decision was made. The difference was something harder to account for, a quality of presence, the impression that the person asking for confidence deserved it. She thought about this in the middle of the nights, which were long. She thought about what Harrison's argument would actually be. Stripped of its diplomatic framing, she thought about the board members who were uncertain and what they were really uncertain about. And she thought about Ryan saying, "Don't give that to them," and the specific weight the words had carried, the quality of someone saying the true version of a thing rather than the managed version. She called him on the 4th of January. She told herself it was to discuss the Beacon Hill completion report, which she did in fact want to discuss. She called anyway, at 8 in the evening, which was not a business hour, which meant she was not entirely lying to herself, but not entirely honest either. He answered on the third ring, slightly breathless, with background noise that resolved as she listened, the sound of a small person demanding something in the near distance. "Hold on," he said, not to her. Then, "Lily, the video will still be there after I—" "Lily." A pause. This was to Vanessa. "Sorry, she's negotiating her bedtime in a way that involves pretending she left the TV on when she definitely turned it off herself." "Is it working?" "It always almost works," he said. That's what makes it so annoying." The background negotiation reached some kind of resolution. She heard a door close, then quiet. "Beacon Hill report," she said. "Right." He settled into it quickly. "The coalition submitted the final documentation to the city this week. The building's registered as compliant now. The manager sent us a note. Apparently 3 residents who hadn't been using the front entrance in over a year have started using it. 3 that you know of." "3 that he counted," Ryan said. "Could be more." She wrote nothing down. She just held the number. 3 people using a door they hadn't been able to use. That was what $14,000 and 6 weeks of work had produced, and she was aware that this was not nothing. She was aware that she had been adding up small nothings her whole life, and that some of them had turned out to be large somethings in retrospect. "I've been thinking about scaling it," she said. "The program. A formal initiative, not just funding individual coalition projects. A structured program. Assessments, funding, implementation support, job creation for the people doing the work." She paused. "I've been mapping it for a couple of weeks." He was quiet in the way she recognized now as thinking rather than waiting. "What's the obstacle?" "The board vote is in 3 weeks," she said. "If the vote goes wrong, the program doesn't happen. I'm not in a position to build something like that if I'm not running the company. And if the vote goes right, then I build it." Another pause. "You're worried it won't go right." She didn't answer immediately, which was itself an answer. "Vanessa." He said it carefully, not reaching for anything beyond what was there. "Tell me what you're actually thinking, not the strategic version." She looked at the dark window of the study, the reflection of the desk lamp floating in the glass. She had not been asked this question in exactly this way in a very long time. Most people who wanted to know what she was thinking were looking for information they could use. Ryan was not looking for information. He was just asking. "I'm thinking," she said slowly, "that there is a version of this where I walk into that boardroom and they look at me. And regardless of what I say, regardless of what the numbers show, there is something in the room that has already been decided, something that has nothing to do with the company and everything to do with—" She stopped. With the chair, he said. With what they think the chair means. About what I can do. About what I'm worth. She said it flatly because that was the only way to say it without it becoming something larger than she wanted it to be right now. I've been in enough rooms to know when a decision is made before anyone speaks. And I'm not sure I can change a room that's already made up its mind. Ryan was quiet for long enough that she checked the call was still connected. Can I ask you something? He said. You already did once. I said yes. You told me about the locket. When it dropped. You said people just stood there. Yes. And you were waiting for someone to pick it up, and they didn't, and then I did. He paused. Did you expect it? That someone eventually would? She thought about this honestly. No, she said. By the time you did it, I was already calculating how to get to a wall to brace against so I could try to reach it myself. So you were going to handle it anyway? I was going to try. Right. Something in his voice, not triumphant, nothing like that. Just landing somewhere he'd been working toward. That's the same room. She said nothing. The boardroom. It's the same thing. They might be standing there deciding whether to pick it up or not. But you were already figuring out how to do it yourself. That's not changed. She sat with this. It was not a complicated argument. It was not the kind of thing her legal team would put in a brief or her strategic advisors would frame in a slide deck. It was just a direct thing, said directly. You're better at this than you look, she said. What, talking people into things? Saying the actual thing. I've had to learn, he said. With Lily. Kids will call you on it immediately if you're managing them instead of talking to them. You get trained out of the managed version pretty fast. She thought about Lily handing her the corner piece of cake. Just like that. No calculation. The training ground of a 6-year-old who accepted nothing but directness. How is she? Vanessa asked. Asleep, hopefully. She heard him move, a chair adjusting. She's been asking when she'll see you again. I've been telling her I don't know, which is true. Is that the managed version or the actual thing? A beat. Both, I think. The call did not last much longer. She said she'd be in touch about the initiative after the board meeting. He said, okay. She thanked him for the completion report. He said it was nothing. She knew it wasn't. She sat in the study after the call, the lamp the only light, the window showing her reflection, and the dark house beyond. She picked up the locket from the desk where it lived now, where it had lived every night for 2 months, a habit she'd developed without planning to. She held it and thought about the room she was going to walk into in 3 weeks, and about what she was going to say when she got there. She did not make the decision about how to handle the board meeting through any single moment of clarity. It accumulated, the way most things did, from the legal strategy sessions, and the conversations with board allies and the long nights of thinking, and from the phone call with Ryan, and from 3 weeks of watching the news cycle carry Harrison's narrative about her leadership and her company with the uncomfortable efficiency of a story that had enough truth in its edges to seem credible. The media coverage started in the second week of January and was what she'd expected from the shape of Harrison's strategy. Nothing direct, nothing that would leave a mark if it was wrong. But the business press had a way of asking questions that contained their own answers. Pieces about Hart Industries' strategic direction, unnamed sources expressing concern about the company's recent performance, an analyst who went on the record to say he was watching the governance situation carefully. No one said disability. No one needed to. Vanessa read each piece once, set it aside, and did not read it again. She had learned this discipline because the alternative was spending hours inside the psychology of people trying to affect her with words, and that was time she didn't have and couldn't afford to spend. What she did instead was prepare. She spent 3 days drafting what she was going to say in the boardroom. Not the arguments, those were already assembled, had been for weeks. She meant the other part, the part that her legal team had not suggested and that Margaret had looked at when she saw the outline and said quietly, "Are you sure?" "No," Vanessa had said. "Draft it anyway." The draft went through 4 versions. The first was too formal. It read like a speech, which was wrong. The second overcorrected and read like it was trying not to be a speech, which was worse. The third was closer, but it started in the wrong place. The fourth started with a fact she'd never said publicly, and from there the rest of it followed. And it was not good exactly, but it was true, and she thought true might be what the room needed. She didn't show it to the legal team. She showed it to Margaret, who read it twice without speaking. "If it doesn't work," Margaret finally said, "it's going to be very difficult." "If the alternative works," Vanessa said, "what exactly does it win?" Margaret looked at the draft. then at Vanessa. When did you decide this? Vanessa thought about the locket on the marble floor and the seconds she'd spent watching people not pick it up. A while ago, she said. I just didn't know I'd decided. Ryan did not know the specifics of what she was planning. She hadn't told him, partially because the elements hadn't fully assembled until the week before the meeting, and partially because she was not sure she wanted to examine it too closely in conversation before she had to say it in a room that mattered. But she texted him the night before. She had not done this before. Their contact had been calls and emails, the coalition's formal channels, the structured approach she'd established early and maintained because it kept things clear. She picked up her phone at 11 at night and typed, "Board meeting is tomorrow." She set the phone down, picked it up, added, "I know what I'm going to say." She set it down again. The phone buzzed 3 minutes later. "Good," he wrote. Then, after a short pause, "Lily says to tell the Locket to bring good luck." I didn't explain what that meant, I just wrote it down. She looked at this for a moment, then she typed, "Tell her I'll bring it." She set the phone on the nightstand and lay in the dark and thought about tomorrow. Sleep came eventually, not well, but enough. The morning of the board meeting was clear and cold, the sky a thin winter blue that Seattle produced rarely and that always felt slightly unearned. Vanessa was up at 5:30, dressed by 6:15. She ate breakfast she didn't taste. Margaret arrived at 7 with the morning briefing, and they went through the day's logistics with the efficiency of two people who had done versions of this together for many years. At 8:45, Vanessa's driver brought the car around. The Hart Industries headquarters building was in downtown Seattle, 12 floors of glass and steel that her father had moved the company into in the 90s, and that Vanessa had renovated twice since taking over, most recently adding the accessible design elements that were now considered standard in the building's presentation to potential hires and partners. The main entrance had 3 steps and an adjacent ramp that she'd insisted on making fully integrated rather than the afterthought addition that most buildings treated it as. She arrived at 9:15. There were reporters at the entrance, not a crowd, but enough, clearly tipped by someone in Harrison's camp about the significance of the morning's meeting. She had anticipated this. She moved through the entrance without stopping, which required the kind of deliberate calm that was different from not feeling anything. She felt something, she just didn't stop moving. In the elevator, Margaret said nothing. This was correct. The boardroom was on the 11th floor, a long room with a table that seated 16 and a wall of windows that looked out over the city and the water beyond. By the time Vanessa arrived, 7 of the 12 board members were already seated. 3 more came in within 5 minutes. Harrison and his close ally, Dina Park, arrived last, which was a choice. Harrison was 55, silver-haired, the kind of man whose confidence read as competence until you watched him in the specific situations where actual competence was required. He'd been effective in his role at Hart Industries because effectiveness in that role was something Vanessa had understood and structured. He'd built the board challenge because he understood which kind of effectiveness was needed there and had applied it systematically. She gave him that privately, as she watched him take his seat at the far end of the table. He met her eyes and held them for a moment. His expression was neutral in the practiced way of someone who had prepared their expression. She looked back and did not prepare anything at all. The meeting was called to order. The chair, Thomas Reeves, nominally independent, uncertain in the vote count she'd constructed, went through the formal agenda items first. This was how these things worked. The real thing was always preceded by an hour of everything that was not the real thing. She sat through it with the patience of someone who understood that the preceding hour served a purpose. It established the room's temperature, revealed who was paying attention, and who was managing their own composure, gave her time to watch. Harrison was composed. He had 2 allies who would speak for him when it was time. He had his narrative ready. She'd seen enough versions of it in the press to know its shape. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was what she was going to do. Reeves introduced the strategic review item at 11:05. Harrison led his case. It was crisp, professionally constructed, and technically confined to issues of strategic vision and performance metrics while managing to imply everything else. He cited 3/4 of slower growth that were real and that had causes he correctly identified and incorrectly attributed. He spoke about the need for the company to evolve its leadership approach at a critical moment. He was careful. He was very careful. When he finished, 2 of his allies added supporting comments. The room settled into the particular silence of a space waiting for the other side to speak. Vanessa had planned to begin with the performance data. The legal team had outlined a sequence that started with numbers and built to the argument, because numbers were solid ground, and you established your footing on solid ground before moving to less stable terrain. She didn't start with the numbers. 11 years ago, she said, I walked into this room for the first time as acting CEO. My father had been dead for 6 weeks. He'd built this company over 30 years and left it to me, and half the people at this table weren't sure he'd made the right call. She let that settle. I was 25 and I didn't have a long track record, and I hadn't been the expected choice. The concerns were reasonable. What they missed was that I'd been inside this company since I was 17 years old, sitting in my father's office during summer breaks, reading reports. I was too young to understand completely, and learning to understand them anyway. What they missed is that by the time I sat in this chair, I knew this company better than most of the people in this room did. She looked around the table without hurrying. That hasn't changed. Harrison's expression had become very still. He was recalibrating. The strategic questions Richard has raised are real questions, she said. The growth metrics he cited are real metrics. I'm not going to tell you the last 3 quarters were what I wanted them to be, because they weren't. What I'm going to tell you is what caused them, what I've done about it, and why the analysis he's presented is technically accurate and fundamentally wrong. She spent 20 minutes on this. The numbers, the context, the market conditions, the specific decisions she'd made and why she'd made them, and what they would produce over the next 18 months. She knew this material with the precision of someone who had lived inside it, and she went through it without notes, which was a choice, because people who know things don't read them from a page. She watched faces around the table. Park was resolute. She was Harrison's and wasn't moving. 2 others were Harrison's and also weren't moving. Reeves was listening in a way that was different from the way he'd been listening during Harrison's presentation. She noted this. Then she stopped with the numbers. I want to say something that isn't in any document, she said, and I want to be direct about it because I think we've spent enough months being indirect. The room's quality changed. Even Harrison's stillness shifted. 5 years ago, I was in a car accident outside Portland. My spinal cord was damaged. I spent 8 months in rehabilitation facilities. When I came back to this building and sat in this chair again, I was in a different chair than the one I'd left in. She said this flatly, without effect. She had rehearsed the flatness, not because it was how she felt, but because the room needed her steady. I know what's underneath the strategic review Richard has organized. I know what the real argument is. I'm not going to make everyone pretend it isn't happening. She could feel the room holding its breath. This was not how boardroom conversations went. Everyone in that room had learned over careers spent in rooms like this that the real argument was never named directly. You managed it. You shaped it. You let it do its work without acknowledging it was working. She was naming it. So I'm going to tell you what I can and cannot do, she said. I cannot walk. I cannot drive myself. There are buildings in this city I can't easily enter, events I can't access the way other people can, physical limitations that are real and that I have learned to work around and that are never going to fully go away. She looked at Harrison directly. What I can do is run this company. I can read a balance sheet in the dark. I can tell you the margin structure of every product line we operate. I can tell you the specific concerns of every major client we have and what it took to acquire and retain each one of them. I can tell you where this company is going in the next 3 years and exactly how we're going to get there. She paused. I've been doing it for 11 years. The chair is not what changed. The room was very quiet. What changed, she said more quietly, is that some of you stopped believing I could. And I want to know why, specifically, because I deserve to know. And because whatever the answer is, I'd rather have it on the table than manage it in back channels for another 6 months. Harrison opened his mouth. I'm not finished, she said. He closed it. She went back to the numbers then. The forward projections, the initiatives she'd been preparing, the accessibility program she outlined in 3 minutes as a business case rather than a goodwill gesture, framing it the way Ryan had helped her see it, as infrastructure investment with long-term return, as positioning that the company's competitors hadn't made, and that would matter in ways the next generation of talent and consumers would remember. She laid it out efficiently. She answered the 3 questions she anticipated before they were asked. Then she stopped. Thomas, she said to Reeves, the floor is yours. Reeves looked at her for a long moment. I was 61, had been on the board for 7 years, had voted against her twice in her tenure and with her 4 times, which she had always understood as the record of a genuinely independent director rather than an ally or an opponent. He was, she thought, the exact person the room turned on. He looked down at the table, then back at her, then at Harrison. Richard, he said, I'd like you to walk me through the alternative leadership proposal, specifically. He set his pen down with the deliberate quality of someone making a small decision that had significant weight. Who exactly are we discussing? Harrison had a name. He produced it. The person was credentialed, external, safe, in the way that the board's uncertain members might find reassuring. Have they met with any of our major clients? Reeves asked. Not yet, but have they reviewed our current product development pipeline? A pause. The proposal is that an evaluation period. So that's no, Reeves said. He picked up his pen. He did not say anything else. The vote, when it happened, took 11 minutes to get through the formalities. In the end, it was 8-4. Harrison's 4 held. The other 8 did not. Vanessa sat at the table as the result was confirmed and did not let anything show, because the room was still watching, and what you showed in the aftermath of a close thing mattered almost as much as what you showed going into it. She thanked the board members. She noted formally that she expected the 4 dissenting votes to be honored as the legitimate expression of directorial independence that they were, and that she had no intention of treating the matter as anything other than concluded. Harrison looked at her across the table. She looked back. She had won, and they both knew it, and there was nothing to perform about it in either direction. We'll schedule the follow-up on the strategic initiative proposal, she said to the room generally. Margaret will coordinate. She left the boardroom with Margaret, who waited until the elevator doors closed before exhaling. 8-4, Margaret said. Reeves, Vanessa said. He turned it. When he asked the alternative candidate question, Park's expression, I saw. The press is still downstairs. I know. What do you want to say to them? Vanessa thought about this for the 11 floors of descent. The elevator opened into the lobby. Through the glass entrance, she could see the cluster of reporters, the cameras, the cold morning light on the plaza outside. The truth, she said, the managed version of it. I've got about 4 minutes of material. She moved toward the entrance. Then she stopped. She reached into her jacket pocket. The locket was there, where she'd put it that morning. She held it for a second, the weight of it. The specific warmth it had from being close to her body. She thought about Lily's voice. Tell the locket to bring good luck. She let go of it, left it in her pocket. Then she pushed through the doors into the cold and the waiting cameras and said what she'd decided to say, which was the truth in the way that truth sometimes had to be delivered. Directly, without softening, with a complete willingness to be seen saying it. She talked for 4 minutes and 12 seconds. She said the word wheelchair once, early, matter-of-factly, and then she didn't say it again because she didn't need to. She talked about the company and where it was going and the program she was building and why it mattered beyond optics or public relations. She said she had been building Hart Industries for 11 years and she intended to build it for 11 more. The reporters asked questions. She answered the ones worth answering and didn't answer the ones that weren't. Then she was done, and her driver pulled up and she got in the car, and the doors closed and the quiet of the interior settled around her. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. Ryan. A single line. Lily wants to know how it went. She looked at the message. Outside the window, Seattle moved past. The winter city, the water in the distance, the gray-blue sky that was still holding its cold clarity from the morning. She typed back. Tell her it went. She looked at this for a second, then added, Tell her the locket helped. She put the phone in her pocket beside the locket and watched the city move past the window. The driver said nothing, which was correct. The radio was off. In the quiet, she could hear the sound of her own breathing, which was steady, and the low sound of the car's engine, and somewhere beneath all of it, not heard exactly, but present, the specific quality of something that had been held in tension for a very long time, beginning, slowly, to release. She was still the thing she was. The chair was still there. Harrison's 4 votes were still on record and would remain so. The work ahead was still the work ahead. But she had walked, had moved, into the room. She had said the real thing, and the room had not gone the way the room sometimes went, had not already made up its mind beyond the reach of the truth. 8 people had listened and had voted for what they heard. That was not everything. It was not even most things. But it was what had been available to win today, and she had won it. She sat back in the seat and let the city go past, and did not think about anything in particular for the 15 minutes it took to get home, which was the first time she had done that in a very long time. The days after the vote had a particular texture that Vanessa hadn't expected. She'd anticipated the work. There was always work in the aftermath of something like this. The formal communications, the press statements, the internal messaging to the company that had to be careful without being defensive, confident without being triumphant. She'd prepared for all of it. What she hadn't prepared for was the specific quality of the quiet that came after the preparation was finished and the immediate crisis had passed, and there was nothing left to do but be in the space that remained. She sat at her desk on the Thursday following the vote, the morning's calls completed, the afternoon's schedule not yet begun, and noticed that her hands were still. Not the deliberate stillness of concentration, but the unstudied stillness of someone who had been tense for so long that they'd stopped noticing the tension, and now that it had released, they didn't quite know what to do with their hands. She looked at them for a moment. Then she picked up the locket from its place on the desk, held it, set it back down. The 4 executives behind the challenge had resigned in the 2 days following the vote. Harrison first, then the 2 who had spoken for him in the boardroom, then Dina Park in a brief and professionally worded statement that contained no acknowledgement of what it was actually about. Vanessa had accepted each resignation with the same form letter, edited only in name. She felt no particular satisfaction about this. What she felt was closer to the relief of finishing a calculation that had been running in the background for months, taking up processing space she could now redirect. Margaret had arranged the internal reorganization meetings for the following week. The legal team had cleared the paperwork. The communications team had handled the external narrative with the precision she'd come to expect from people who were good at their jobs. By Thursday morning, the board situation was, in the formal sense, resolved. What wasn't resolved was everything that the board situation had interrupted, or perhaps clarified. The question of what came next, and what she actually wanted the next to look like. She called Ryan that afternoon. He picked up on the second ring, which meant he wasn't in the middle of a physical task. "Hey," he said, the single word with no information attached, leaving the shape of the call entirely to her. "I want to move forward on the program," she said, formally. Not the coalition specifically. I mean, the full initiative. Assessments, funding structure, the implementation side of it. I want to build it properly. A pause. Okay. I've been thinking about who should run the implementation work. The ground level piece, the site coordination, the community partnerships. I've been thinking about it since Beacon Hill, actually. Another pause. Longer this time. "Vanessa, I'm not offering you something because of..." She stopped herself, started again. "The board meeting changed the timeline, but not the substance. I was going to have this conversation regardless. I have documentation of what the coalition accomplished on 3 sites, and I've talked to 6 of your volunteers, and the consensus is that the quality of the ground level work traces directly to your involvement. That's the professional case." "Okay," he said carefully. "The problem is that what I'm describing is a full-time position, with a salary that reflects it, and that's a different thing from what you're doing now." She could hear him breathing. She could almost hear him thinking, which was a thing she'd learned to do over 3 months of conversations that had the quality of being listened to as carefully as she was trying to listen. "That's a big change," he said. "I know. Lily's school is in Renton. My apartment is in Renton. I've got schedules around. The position is Seattle-based, but the sites are regional," she said. "The schedule is yours to build within the project requirements. I'm not asking you to fit into something. I'm asking you to help design it." He was quiet. "Ryan." She said it the way he said her name sometimes, not demanding anything, just making sure the other person knew they were actually being addressed. "You've been doing 3 jobs for 3 years. You've been doing it because the bills required it, and because the silence required something in it, and both of those things are real. But the program I'm describing, it's the work, the actual work. The thing you're already doing, but with the resources and structure to do it at a scale that matters. You make it sound simple. It isn't. There's a significant learning curve on the administrative side, and you'd need support staff, and the stakeholder management is a different complexity than site management. I'm not telling you it's simple." She paused. "I'm telling you it's possible." The quiet on the line had a different quality now. Not resistance. More like someone standing at the edge of something and measuring the distance. "I'd want to talk to Lily first," he said finally. "Of course. And I'd need to understand the structure in detail before I commit to anything. I'll have Margaret send you the framework document. Read it. Ask every question you have. Take whatever time you need." "You're very thorough," he said, and she could hear the edge of something lighter in it. "I've been told." "Is that a problem?" "Never once," she said. But she sent the framework document that evening. It was 42 pages, which she acknowledged was excessive for an initial conversation, and she said so in the cover note. Ryan wrote back 40 minutes later to say he'd read the whole thing, which she believed, because the 7 questions he attached were specific enough to have required reading the whole thing. She answered the questions in order, at length, at 11 o'clock at night, which was not a reasonable hour to be writing professional correspondence, but was, for her, a completely normal hour to be doing anything. He wrote back. Question 4. You said the assessment framework would be developed collaboratively. What does that mean in practice? She wrote, It means I have the resources and you have the knowledge, and neither of those things is sufficient without the other. He didn't respond for a few minutes. Then, okay. Then, Lily says yes, by the way, to the job. She said you should hire the one who knows how the ramps work. I told her that was the idea. Vanessa read this twice. Then she wrote, Tell her I agree with her hiring criteria. She closed the laptop and sat in the study. The locket was on the desk. Outside, January had settled into the long, dark stretch of Pacific Northwest winter, the kind that went on long enough that you started to forget there had ever been a different season. She'd lived in Seattle her whole life, and she still found January difficult. Not the cold exactly, but the accumulated weight of limited light, the way everything contracted. She looked at the locket. She thought about her mother, who had loved winter in the irrational way of people who find something beautiful in difficult things, who had worn this locket every day for 20 years without ever explaining why, who had died in March, which meant the last winter she'd lived through was the last complete dark season Vanessa had shared with her, 21 years old, both of them sitting in the kitchen of the house that Vanessa had since purchased and converted into this mansion she lived in alone. She wondered, not for the first time, what her mother would make of all of this. The chair, the company, the board vote, the man who'd picked up the locket and handed it back like it cost him nothing. The small girl with the braids who had added a napkin drawing of the locket to a memory box kept for a woman she would grow up without knowing. She didn't know. She could guess. Her mother had been the kind of person who noticed the particular people in a room that others overlooked, which was perhaps where Vanessa had gotten the habit. She turned off the desk lamp and went to bed. February arrived, and the program started to become real in the way that things became real when money and personnel and legal structure were attached to them. Vanessa worked through the details with the same focus she gave the company's financial architecture, because the thing she'd learned over 11 years of building was that programs built on good intentions and insufficient infrastructure collapsed in a predictable sequence, and she intended to build something that would survive past the point where her personal attention was on it. Ryan came into the Hart Industries offices for the first time on a Tuesday morning in the second week of February. He wore the same navy blazer from the gala, which fit the same way it had before, and he sat across from Margaret in the conference room off the main floor and went through the employment paperwork with the careful attention of someone taking something seriously without being overwhelmed by it. Margaret had told Vanessa afterward that he'd read every document before signing it, asked 2 questions about the benefit structure, and thanked her without the excessive quality that most people applied to gratitude in a formal context. He's direct, Margaret said, with the tone of someone approving of a thing. Yes, Vanessa said. He is. His office was a converted storage room on the 3rd floor that had been cleared and furnished with a desk, a filing cabinet, and a window that looked out onto a narrow alley, which was not a view, but was at least light. Ryan had stood in the doorway the first time he saw it and looked around with the expression of someone taking inventory. Is this okay? Vanessa had asked. It's fine, he said. More space than my desk at the building maintenance job. He touched the window frame. This opens? I'll find out. It opened. She'd had facilities checked that morning after he left. The first weeks were complicated in the specific way that integration into a new institutional environment was always complicated. Ryan knew the ground-level work with an intimacy that no document could replicate, but the organizational language of a corporation the size of Hart Industries was a different grammar, and there was a period of translation required. Vanessa had anticipated this and built it into the timeline, which meant she wasn't alarmed by it, but she watched it with the particular attention of someone who understood that this phase was where things either took root or didn't. He was a fast learner. He asked questions without embarrassment, which was rarer than it should have been in professional environments. He listened in meetings with the same quality of actual listening she'd noticed in every context she'd observed him in. He was also stubborn in ways that were sometimes useful and occasionally not. He had strong opinions about implementation sequencing, and he'd learned from years of site work to back those opinions with specifics. And he did this even in rooms where specifics were unwelcome. Twice in the first month, he pushed back on decisions Vanessa had made in the program's design, once correctly and once less so, and both times she'd taken the pushback seriously enough to examine the decision, which was more than most of the people in the building could say they'd gotten from her. "You argue with me," she said one afternoon in late February when they were going through the assessment framework for the third revision. "Do you want me to stop? I want to understand what you're doing." He looked at her across the desk. "I'm talking to you like a person," he said. "Is that a problem?" She looked at him. "No," she said. "I'm just noting it." He went back to the framework. After a moment, "Most people here are very careful around you." "Yes." "They manage what they say before they say it. It's a professional habit." "I know." He made a note on the printed copy in front of him, the way he made notes everywhere. Margin comments, small diagrams, practical in the way of someone whose thinking had always happened in proximity to physical action. "I don't do it well. The managing. I can try." "Don't," she said. He looked up. "Don't try," she said. "It would make you less useful." He held her gaze for a second. Then he went back to the framework. The program was announced publicly in the first week of March. Vanessa had worked with the communications team on the framing for 2 weeks, going through 4 versions of the press materials before arriving at language that said what she wanted without turning into a corporate goodwill exercise. The name was functional, the Heart Access Initiative. The scope was national, rolling out in 3 phases over 30 months, beginning with Pacific Northwest sites and expanding based on assessed need and available partnerships. The response was what she'd expected: a mix of genuine interest from organizations in the sector, skepticism from the business press about whether a program this scale could deliver on its stated goals, and a smaller subset of coverage that focused on Vanessa personally, on the disability angle, on the narrative that assembled itself around a wheelchair and a CEO and a nationwide accessibility program. She let this coverage exist without engaging it. The story it was telling was not wrong, exactly, but it was simpler than the reality, and she'd decided early that she was not going to manage the narrative toward complexity when the work would eventually speak more clearly than anything she could say. What she hadn't anticipated was Lily. Lily had been informed, in age-appropriate terms, that her father was starting a new job. She had received this information with the focused interest she applied to most things, and had asked 4 specific questions. Was he going to work with the ramps? Was it far away? Would he still pick her up from school? And was Vanessa going to be there? Ryan had answered yes, no, yes, and sometimes in that order. Lily had processed this for approximately 90 seconds, and then said she thought it was a good job because Vanessa knew about the ramps, which was the same hiring criterion she'd approved by text message in January, apparently constituting a completed circle of logic. The first time Lily came to the Hart Industries building was on a Friday afternoon in March, when Ryan had a site review that ran long, and the after-school pickup required a reroute. She arrived with a backpack almost as large as she was, and immediately identified the building as having a ramp on the left side that was very good, and a door that was a little heavy. "The door is automatic," Ryan said. "You don't push it." "I know," she said. "But what if the automatic breaks?" "Then we get it fixed." She considered this. "Or you could make it lighter." "Or we could make it lighter," he agreed. She met Margaret, who she studied with the unblinking concentration that small people brought to adults they were assessing. Margaret, to her credit, assessed back without condescension. "You're the one who writes things down," Lily said. "I am," Margaret said. "Dad says you're very efficient." "Your father is perceptive." Lily nodded, apparently filed, and moved on. She found Vanessa in her office at the end of the hall, which was the largest room on the floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 sides and a desk that was, to Lily's visible assessment, extremely large. She stood in the doorway and looked at everything with the systematic thoroughness of a child conducting an inspection. "This is a big room," she said. "It is," Vanessa agreed. "Is that because you're important?" "It's because my father was important, and this was his room, and I kept it." Lily walked in, set her backpack down with a thump, and looked at the windows. "You can see the water. On clear days." "Is today clear?" "Mostly." Lily went to the window and looked out. The February clarity had continued in patches through March. Seattle offering its occasional apologies, the water visible in the distance, gray-green and flat, the city spreading toward it under a sky that was doing its best. "Dad says you're building ramps everywhere," Lily said to the window. "Not exactly everywhere, in specific places that need them." "How do you know which places needed them?" "We assess them." Look at the buildings, see what's missing, figure out what the solution is. Like when Dad looks at the measurements. Exactly like that. Lily turned from the window. She had the locket in her field of vision now. It was on the desk, where it lived. She looked at it with the recognition of something familiar. Can I see it? She asked. Vanessa picked it up, carried it to where Lily was standing, opened it. Lily looked at the photograph, the same focused attention she'd given it at the gala and at the coffee tent and in the accumulation of interactions that had built between them across months. Then she looked up at Vanessa. Does it make you sad? She asked, carrying it around. Vanessa thought about this. Less than it used to, she said. Because you got used to it? Because I remembered what it's for. It's not to make me sad. It's to keep her close. Lily considered this with the seriousness she applied to things that mattered to her. That's what Dad says about Mom's stuff, she said. He says we keep it because we want to, not because we have to. She looked at the locket again. That's smart. Your dad is smart, Vanessa said. Lily nodded as if this was established fact. He's better now, she said, than before, when he was really tired. She looked at Vanessa with the directness that Vanessa had learned was not artlessness, but something more like the decision to say what she meant, because the alternative was saying less than what she meant. You helped. Vanessa sat with this. He helped me too, she said. Lily shrugged, accepting the accounting. That's how it works, I think, she said. You help, and then they help back. She picked up her backpack from the floor with the effort of something heavy badly balanced. I'm going to wait in the other room, with the lady who writes things down. Margaret. Margaret, she confirmed, and went. Vanessa sat in the large room with the windows and the water and the desk that had been her father's and now was hers, and held the locket and thought about what Lily had said with the simplicity of someone who had not yet learned to complicate the things that were actually simple. You help, and then they help back. Spring came to Seattle the way it always did. Not in a single day, but in increments, the light changing before the temperature did, the trees committing to leaves while the air still had cold in it. By April, the first phase of the Hard Access Initiative had assessed 47 buildings in 3 cities. 12 were in active renovation planning. 4 had been completed. Ryan ran the implementation with an operational precision that surprised the Hart Industries staff who encountered it, though it didn't surprise Vanessa, who had seen how he thought about problems since the day she'd examined the corner join of a ramp in a Renton parking lot, and he'd told her about the back and forth with the contractor and the solution that had held up through winter. He built his team the way he built everything, for function first, with attention to the parts that had to last. He hired 7 people in the first 3 months, all of them with ground-level experience in construction, facilities, or social services. He wrote the job descriptions himself, which Vanessa's HR director had initially viewed as irregular and which produced the best pool of applicants the initiative had seen because Ryan wrote about what the jobs actually required rather than what they conventionally said. They worked together, Vanessa and Ryan, in the particular way that proximity produced, not always smoothly, not without friction, but with the accumulated efficiency of 2 people who had learned each other's thinking well enough to skip certain steps. She knew when he was going to push back before he did it. He knew when she'd already made a decision before she announced it. They'd developed the shorthand of people who had talked through enough specific things to no longer need to talk through the general ones. What they hadn't talked through was the other thing. She was aware of it the way she was aware of the locket, not constantly, but present in the background, there when the foreground quieted. The specific quality of the way he was in a room, the way his attention settled on her when she was talking, not the managed attention of professional courtesy, but something more grounded, something that had the weight of actual interest. She'd observed it for months and had not addressed it, because addressing it would require both of them to decide what it was and what to do with that, and she wasn't sure she was ready for the decision. She also wasn't sure she was being fair to him by not having it. The day she finally said something was a Tuesday in April after a site meeting ran late, and they ended up in a coffee shop near the Pike Place area because it was close and they were both hungry and the alternative was going back to the office. The coffee shop was small and slightly too warm and had the specific noise of a place where people had been coming for a long time because it was good, and they didn't care that it was crowded. They'd been talking about the second phase assessment schedule, and then they'd stopped talking about it, and the conversation had moved sideways the way it sometimes did in the spaces between agenda items. Can I ask you something? She said. You've asked me that before, he said. It was followed by a real question. It is a real question. He wrapped both hands around his coffee mug. It was a habit she'd noticed. He was always cold in air-conditioned spaces, which was most indoor spaces, and he held things warm when he could. Ask, he said. Since the gala, she said. Since the locket. The way you've been. She stopped herself from the indirect version, started with the direct one. I've been trying to understand what this is. Between us. What you think it is. He didn't look away. He also didn't answer immediately, and she'd learned not to fill his silences. He was not a person who paused because he was stalling. He paused because he was thinking about what he actually meant. I think, he said slowly, that I met someone at a charity event, and she was someone I wanted to know better. And I got to know her better. And now, he paused again. And now I'm not sure what category that fits in, and I've been waiting to figure it out. We work together, she said. We do. That complicates it. Yes. He looked at his coffee. Are you asking me to keep it complicated? Or are you asking something else? She sat with the question. Around them, the coffee shop moved. Other people's conversations, the sound of the machine, the door opening and letting in a brief cut of spring air. I don't know how to do this, she said. It was the most honest thing she could say, and she said it plainly. There hasn't been anyone since before the accident, and that's not the chair. It's not what the chair changed about my life. It's what I changed. How far I closed things down. She looked at him. You're the first person in 5 years who's made me want to open any of it back up. And I don't know whether that's a reason to be more careful or less. Ryan set his coffee down. He looked at her with the full, unmanaged attention that was one of the most consistent things about him. I'm not going anywhere, he said. Whatever pace you need for figuring it out. That's not a pressure thing. It's just true. I know it is, she said. That's what makes it hard. He looked at her. Hard how? Because when someone gives you time and space and no pressure, you run out of excuses for staying where you are. He almost smiled. Is staying where you are the plan? It was the plan, she said. I'm not sure it still is. The coffee shop noise continued around them. Outside, the spring afternoon was doing its best. The light that Seattle earned through months of patience, landing on the water and the buildings and the ordinary March afternoon that was becoming something more specific. Lily told me you were better, he said, after Beacon Hill. She said you were more awake. She told me you started whistling again. He absorbed this. The expression on his face, not the one he put on for rooms, but the one underneath, the one that had been tired for 3 years and was, recently, something else. Yeah, he said. I did. She looked at the window. The street outside, the people moving through it. 2 women with strollers. A man on a bicycle navigating the cobblestones near the market. An ordinary Tuesday afternoon with ordinary people in it, doing ordinary things. I want to try, she said. She said it to the window, then corrected herself and said it to him. At whatever this is, I want to try. He nodded once, not with the performance of a significant moment, not with any of the drama the moment could have justified, just, yes. Okay, let's try. There'll be things I'm bad at, she said. There are walls I've built that don't come down fast. I know. And Lily, whatever this is has to be right for her, not just acceptable. Right. She told you to hire me because I knew about the ramps, he said. She already voted. Vanessa looked at him. That was for the job. Lily doesn't separate things that cleanly, he said. She made one decision. It covered everything. She sat with this. The coffee was getting cold, but neither of them was drinking it anyway. Outside, a kid ran past the window chasing something. A ball, a dog, just running for its own sake the way kids sometimes did. Gone in 2 seconds. There and then past. She's going to want to tell me how to do this, Vanessa said. She's going to have opinions. She's going to have very specific opinions, Ryan said, in a particular order of importance. What's number 1? He thought about it. The locket, probably. She's decided it matters. It does matter. Yeah, he said, I know. The afternoon settled around them. The coffee shop continued being what it was. Neither of them moved to leave. The agenda they'd come in with was done, and the thing that wasn't the agenda was sitting between them, acknowledged now, no longer requiring the energy of not acknowledging it. It was not a solved thing. It was not a simple thing. It was 2 imperfect people with complicated histories, and a 6-year-old with strong opinions, and a program to build, and walls that came down slowly, and the specific accumulation of small, honest moments that had led them here, to a coffee shop on a Tuesday in April, saying yes. which was, she thought, enough. For now, for this Tuesday, for the particular afternoon that was what it was, and not something more resolved or more certain. Enough was sufficient. She picked up her cold coffee. He picked up his. They stayed until the coffee shop started filling with the after-work crowd, and then they walked back toward the offices in the spring light, and neither of them felt the need to say much more about it, because some things, once named, didn't need additional language. The program had 47 assessments in 3 cities and 12 renovations in planning and 4 completed. The locket was in her jacket pocket. Lily had already voted. The walls were old and solid and wouldn't come down fast. That was fine. They had time. The summer that followed was the busiest of Vanessa's professional life, which was a high bar. The Hard Access Initiative's second phase launched in June across 5 states, which meant the operational complexity multiplied in ways that tested every assumption she and Ryan had built into the framework. 3 of the new regional partnerships required renegotiation within the first month because the on-site conditions differed from the assessments in ways nobody had fully anticipated. 2 municipal permits stalled in bureaucratic channels that Ryan spent 3 weeks personally navigating. A contractor in Phoenix delivered substandard ramp materials that had to be rejected and replaced, which pushed 2 completion dates back by 6 weeks, and required a difficult conversation with the local community organization that had been waiting longer than anyone should have to wait for a door they could actually use. None of it was clean. None of it went the way the timeline said it would, but it went. By August, the program had completed 23 sites across 7 cities. 61 people with mobility limitations who had been part of the formal assessment process reported direct improvement in their ability to access their own buildings, their own neighborhoods, their own ordinary lives. Ryan kept a running document of these reports, not for the press materials, not for the board presentations, just for himself, because he'd learned from the coalition work that the number on the spreadsheet and the specific person behind it were 2 different things and both deserved to be remembered. Vanessa read the document once, in the middle of a late night in August, and did not read it again, because once was enough to carry it. The relationship between her and Ryan developed the way she'd told him it would. Slowly, imperfectly, with the friction of 2 people who had each built careful walls around themselves, and were now discovering that walls didn't come down in sequence, that some days there was more openness than others, and some days the old habits of isolation reasserted themselves without warning and had to be named and set aside again. She was not always good at naming them. He was not always good at waiting. They had conversations that started as work discussions and became arguments about something else, something underneath, and had to find their way back from the edge of a misunderstanding. She said the wrong thing twice in September and meant something different both times than what came out. And he told her plainly that he needed her to try harder at the translation between what she felt and what she said, and she sat with that for 2 days before coming back to tell him he was right, which cost her something and was worth it. He brought Lily to the mansion for the first time in October. Lily walked through the rooms with the systematic attention she brought to new spaces, cataloging what she saw: the study, the library, the kitchen that was too large for one person, the hallway that had been specifically widened and resurfaced for the wheelchair. She stood in the hallway and looked at the floor. "Did you do this yourself?" she asked. "The floor." "I had it done," Vanessa said. "Is it the right gradient?" "There's no gradient. It's flat." Lily looked at her. "Then why is it different from the other floor?" "Because the material is smoother, easier to move on." Lily considered this with the expression she wore when she was adding something to the internal architecture she was constructing about the world. "My school hallway has a bump at one of the doors," she said. "It's not a lot, but it's bumpy." "How do you know?" "Because I started paying attention when Dad started doing the ramps." She looked at Vanessa with the directness that had never wavered, not since the gala, not since she'd asked about the locket, while her father tried to redirect her. "You changed what I notice." Vanessa sat with this for a moment. She thought about all the things she'd noticed since the accident that she hadn't noticed before it. The step at the wrong place, the narrowed corridor, the heavy door, the absence of the rail that should have been there. The way the world was built for a version of the body that not everybody maintained. She'd been angry about it for a long time before she'd been able to use the anger productively. She still wasn't entirely done being angry, but somewhere in the process, it had shifted from something that depleted her to something that moved her forward. "That's a good thing," she said to Lily. "Noticing." "I know," Lily said, as if this had never been in question. "Can I see the room with all the books?" They walked to the library. Lily pulled 3 books from the shelves, examined their spines, put 2 back, and kept one, a field guide to Pacific Northwest birds that had been Vanessa's father's, and that Vanessa had never looked at, but had kept for the same reason she kept everything of his in the mansion that had been his first. She sat on the library floor with the book in her lap, apparently content, while the adults talked about the October site schedule 3 feet away. This became a pattern. Friday afternoons, sometimes Saturday mornings. Lily arrived with her backpack, installed herself in whatever space seemed appropriate to her, and conducted her life in the parallel track that children established in adult environments, adjacent, connected, operating on her own terms. She had strong opinions about which mug Vanessa used for her morning coffee. She decided, at some point in November, that the study was the best room in the house, and began doing her homework there on Friday afternoons, spread out on the floor because the desk was too high. Vanessa ordered a child height table for the study in November. She did not make a production of it. It arrived on a Tuesday and was there on Friday, and Lily looked at it and said good and used it, and that was the entirety of what was said about it. Ryan watched this happen and said nothing, which was its own kind of language. The community center opening was scheduled for the 3rd Saturday in November. It was the program's largest completed project, a former warehouse in the Georgetown neighborhood that a local nonprofit had purchased 3 years earlier with the intention of converting it into a community space, and had been unable to fully open because 60% of the building was inaccessible to anyone using mobility aids or with significant physical limitations. The Hard Access Initiative had partnered with the nonprofit on a 6-month renovation that addressed the access issues throughout the building while working with the existing structure rather than against it. The same philosophy that had guided the Beacon Hill ramp, the same philosophy that Ryan had been applying since before he had the resources to apply it at this scale. The building still looked like itself. That was the thing Vanessa kept coming back to as the renovation progressed. How the best accessibility work didn't announce itself, didn't transform the space into something that felt medicalized or institutional, just quietly made the building available to everyone who needed to use it. The elevator was there, but so was everything else. The ramps were integrated into the architecture rather than appended to it. The doors were wider but didn't look like accommodation, just looked like doors. Ryan had insisted on this. He'd had 3 arguments with the architectural firm about it, twice in meetings that Vanessa had attended, and once apparently in a phone call that lasted 90 minutes, and that the lead architect had described, when Vanessa spoke to her afterward, as one of the more rigorous conversations she'd had about design philosophy in a long time. "He's very specific," the architect had said. "Yes," Vanessa had said, "he is." The morning of the opening was clear and cold in the way of the best November days. The sky a sharp blue that Seattle didn't produce without effort, the kind of light that made everything look more deliberate than it was. Vanessa arrived an hour early, as she always did for events that required navigation, because an hour gave her time to understand the space before it filled with people and became less predictable. The building was already alive with the controlled chaos of a public event in its final preparation. Volunteers setting up chairs, a small stage with a podium, tables with food that people from 3 community organizations had spent the previous day cooking, children running through the main hall with the specific energy of people who had been told to wait and were struggling with it. Vanessa moved through the space. She checked the corridor clearances by feel as much as by sight, the width, the surface, the grade of the transitions between rooms. All of it was right. She knew it was right because she'd reviewed the specifications 40 times, but knowing something in documents and knowing it in a space were different, and she needed to know it in the space. Ryan found her in the east corridor, examining the threshold between the main hall and the secondary room. "It's good," he said. He was wearing the navy blazer again. It still didn't fit right across the shoulders. She had thought several times about saying something about this, and had decided it was not her business, and also that it was one of the things about him she'd stopped finding notable and started finding simply familiar, which was a different category entirely. "The east threshold is slightly high," she said. He crouched, looked at it. 0.2 inches. Within ADA tolerance. "Tolerance isn't the same as right." "No," he said, "but it's what we had time for. The subfloor in this section." He stood. "I know it. We'll fix it in the spring maintenance cycle." She looked at him. He looked back. This was also a pattern they'd developed, the shorthand of people who had argued enough specific things to know where the arguments were productive and where they were just precision for its own sake. "Fine," she said. "High praise," he said. "But The opening ceremony started at 11. The nonprofit's director spoke for 8 minutes, genuinely and without the managed quality of formal remarks. She talked about the 3 years of trying to open a building that was already theirs, already paid for, already full of programs and people who needed it, and what it had meant when the funding and the expertise arrived to finally make it actually usable for everyone they served. She said the word accessible once and everything else without needing the word, which was how it should work. Ryan spoke briefly, which was characteristic of him. He talked about the team that had done the work, named each of them, said the building would stand longer than any of their careers, and that was the point. He did not mention himself in a way that required anyone to look at him specifically, which was also characteristic. Vanessa was introduced last. She had prepared remarks. She looked at them in the car on the way over and then set them on the seat. She spoke without them. She talked about what it meant to enter a building. She talked about the specific experience of arriving at a place that other people entered without calculation and knowing, before you reached the door, that it would cost you something they didn't pay: effort, time, the particular tax of being a body that the designed world had not been designed for. She talked about this without self-pity and without performance, because she'd learned that both of those were kinds of distance, and she was done with distance. She talked about what the program had found in 7 months of assessments, that the barriers were almost never intentional, almost never the product of malice, almost always the product of people designing for the body they assumed without examining the assumption. She said this was fixable. She said they were fixing it. She talked about the people she'd learned from, without naming them, the volunteers who'd spent weekends on site work, the community members who'd sat through assessment meetings and described in specific terms what their own buildings cost them, the man she'd met at a charity gala who had shown her, through the simple act of doing what needed to be done without making anything of it, that the distance between a problem and its solution was usually shorter than it appeared. She did not look at Ryan when she said this. She didn't need to. She finished. The room was quiet for a moment in the way of rooms that have actually listened, and then there was applause, and then children began running through the building again because they had been still long enough and the building was finally available to be run through, which was the point. Lily had found the main hall's center and was doing something that involved approximately 4 other children and a set of rules that appeared to be evolving in real time. She was 7 now. Her birthday had been in September, marked by a small party in the mansion's kitchen that Vanessa had organized with the help of Margaret, who had turned out to have strong opinions about birthday cake and had been right about all of them. Lily had declared the chocolate version the winner and had eaten a quantity of it that seemed, to the adult observers, to exceed reasonable limits, and had been fine, which was the resilience of 7-year-olds. She'd grown in the year since the gala. The braids were more even now. Ryan had gotten better at them, or Lily had gotten more patient with the process, or possibly both. She'd lost 2 front teeth over the summer and gained them back and was currently somewhere in the process of having opinions about everything and the vocabulary to express most of them, and the judgment that was still catching up to both. She had, over the months, developed a specific relationship with Vanessa that didn't quite have a category. Not mother and daughter, not exactly friends in the way adults were friends. Something particular to them, built from lockets and corner pieces of cake, and Friday afternoons in the study and the child height table that appeared without announcement, and from all the small specific things that accumulate between 2 people who have decided, at different levels of consciousness, to know each other. Vanessa watched Lily run across the hall with the other children. The building was filling now. Families from the neighborhood, people from the organizations the nonprofit served, city council members and community board people and 3 journalists she recognized, all of them mixed into the ordinary crowd that was the point of the space existing at all. She felt the locket in her pocket without reaching for it. She had been carrying it for over a year now, since the night at the gala, since it hit the marble floor and started a sequence of events that she could trace forward from that specific sound to this specific room. And she was not a person who believed in the predetermined shape of things, but she was also not stupid enough to ignore what was apparent when she looked at it. The locket was her mother's. Her mother had kept it for 20 years. Vanessa had kept it for 15. She'd thought of it as a private thing, the most private thing she owned, which was why its loss on that marble floor had stopped her cold. Now she thought of it as something slightly different, not less private, just not only private. It had traveled from her mother to her, from the floor of the Harrington ballroom to Ryan's hand to hers, from her jacket pocket to the desk in the study where Lily saw it every Friday afternoon and looked at it with the eyes of a child who had understood immediately that some objects carry more than their weight. That was what objects could do, sometimes. They traveled. They connected the people who held them across time. She was thinking about this when it happened. She was moving through the main hall, navigating around a cluster of people near the food table, and her front wheel hit something on the floor. A small plastic toy one of the children had dropped, invisible at floor level. And the chair stuttered, just slightly, just enough. The locket slipped from her pocket. She heard it before she saw it. The specific sound she'd know anywhere. The small, clear note of silver on a hard floor. It landed 6 feet ahead of her. And she sat there for just a moment, with the memory of November of the previous year sitting over the present moment like a transparency. The Harrington ballroom, the marble, the people who hadn't moved, the man who had. But this time was different. Because this time, before Ryan could turn from his conversation across the room, before Lily could materialize from the crowd of children, before anyone else could decide whether to move or freeze or look away, Vanessa reached to the side panel of her wheelchair. The panel that housed the small mechanical arm she'd had installed in September, developed through the program's assistive technology partnership with a Seattle engineering firm. A piece of equipment that had been in testing for 4 months, and that she'd been using in controlled environments but hadn't fully used publicly. She extended the arm. It moved to the angle. The grip closed around the locket. She lifted it, brought it back, took it from the grip with her own hand. The whole thing took 11 seconds. She sat with the locket in her hand. The crowd moved around her. Most people hadn't seen it at all. Ryan had turned. He'd seen the end of it, the arm retracting, the locket in her hand. He was standing 20 feet away looking at her with an expression that she couldn't immediately read, and then could, because she knew his face now in all its versions, the tired one, and the focused one, and the one he wore when Lily had said something that surprised him, and the one he had right now, which was the one underneath all the others, the one that had no performance in it at all. He laughed. It was a real laugh. Not polished, not managed, just the actual sound of a person surprised into joy by something they hadn't expected. It was the laugh from the photograph on the Coalition's website, the one caught by accident, the one that had stayed with her since she first saw it in the study at 2 a.m. when she told herself she wasn't going to look. She laughed with him. She couldn't help it. The locket was in her hand and the room was full of people and children were running and the building stood around all of it, finally open to everyone who needed it. And she had just picked up the thing she'd dropped herself using an arm she'd helped build, and she was laughing in public, which was something she hadn't done in 5 years because she'd forgotten that public laughter required feeling like you belonged in public. And she belonged here, in this room, in this city, in this life, in this body that was her body, and not a diminishment of something better, just her, as she was. Lily appeared from nowhere, as she always did, with the radar of a child who knew when something important was happening. She looked at Vanessa's hand. At the locket, at the arm on the wheelchair. "You got it yourself," she said. "I got it myself," Vanessa said. Lily looked at the arm. "Can it pick up other things?" "Within a weight limit." "What's the weight limit?" "About 2 pounds." Lily weighed this information. "That's not very much." "It's enough for the things that matter." Lily looked at her, the serious assessment, the one that had never been anything but direct. Then she nodded, satisfied, and ran back toward the other children. Ryan came over. He was still smiling, the residual of the laugh, the real face he had under the managed one. He stood beside her and they both looked at the room for a moment, the way they'd stood beside each other in the community center in December, watching the older woman with the cane use the ramp for the first time. "The arm works," he said. "The arm works," she confirmed. "The engineers are going to want to document that use case. They already are. I told Margaret to keep a log." He shook his head. "You documented it." "I document everything." "I know." He looked at her sideways with the expression that was almost a smile and then was one. "I know you do." They stood in the noise of the room, children and conversation, and the particular warmth of a building being used for what it was meant for. And Vanessa thought about the year that had brought them here. Not in the summarizing way, not in the way of someone assembling a narrative, but in the way of someone standing inside a thing they'd moved through and recognizing the shape of it now that they could see it from a different angle. She had spent 5 years building walls because the world outside them had seemed, after the accident, to require more than she could sustain. She'd contracted into the mansion, into the company, into the careful management of what she let close to her and what she kept at a functional distance. She told herself this was efficiency. She'd told herself it was protection. Both were partially true. What was also true was that she'd been afraid. Not of the chair, not of the specific practical difficulties of moving through a world built for different bodies. She'd made her peace with those through the long process of learning to navigate them, and the anger that remained was productive rather than paralyzing. She'd been afraid of the other thing, the thing that required you to be seen by people who mattered to you as you actually were, in the body you actually had, in the life that was actually yours. She'd been afraid that being seen that way would confirm what the people who'd stood frozen in the Harrington ballroom seemed to believe, that she was less than she had been, that the wheelchair was a diminishment rather than just a fact. Ryan had walked into that fear and hadn't behaved the way she'd been afraid people would. He'd just handed her the locket. He'd looked at her like a person. He'd pushed back when she was wrong and listened when she was right, and shown up on the sites and read the 42-page document the same night, and asked 7 specific questions and started whistling again. He'd offered his daughter's afternoon company and his own imperfect communication and the specific courage of a person who had survived something terrible and was still choosing to show up every day with his hands open. She had not deserved that specifically. It had not been earned through merit or given as reward. It had happened, because 2 people found themselves in the same room at the same moment, and one of them moved when everyone else stood still, and from that small motion everything else had followed. That was how it worked sometimes, not in the planned way, not through the careful framework she built for everything, not through analysis or preparation or the systematic dismantling of problems into solvable components. Sometimes it was just a person crouching down on a marble floor and handing back what you'd dropped, and something you'd had closed in you for a long time starting, so slowly you barely noticed, to open. The locket was warm in her hand, her mother's face inside it, still laughing at something off camera, still there. She closed her fingers around it. "Hey," Ryan said. She looked at him. "Lily's going to want to leave in about 40 minutes, he said. "She's had a lot of sugar from the dessert table, and when she hits the wall, she hits it fast." "I know," Vanessa said. "I've seen it happen." "After we take her home." He paused. The careful pause, the thinking one. "There's a place near the water that I used to go with Emily sometimes. It's nothing, it's just a bench on the Sound, but the light in the evening in November." He stopped. "I haven't been back. I've been thinking about going back." He looked at her. "I thought maybe you'd want to come." She understood what he was offering. Not just a walk, not just an evening. He was asking her to go with him to the place he'd stopped going to because it held too much of what he'd lost, and to be there when he tried to hold it again. He was asking her to be present for something that cost him something, which was different from any of the other things they'd done, different from the professional collaboration and the careful circling toward each other and the Tuesday afternoon in the coffee shop where they'd named what they were trying. This was the real version, the version without distance. "Yes," she said. Simple, uncomplicated, like handing something back when you find it on the floor. He nodded. They looked at the room together. Lily appeared at Ryan's elbow, slightly vibrating with the specific energy of a child who had hit the sugar threshold and was approximately 12 minutes from a dramatic decline. "I'm tired," she announced, which meant she was almost there. 10 more minutes, Ryan said. "I'm very tired." 8 minutes. She leaned against him with the full weight of someone who had decided that the closest adult was a structural element. He put his arm around her without looking, the automatic adjustment of a parent to a child's specific gravity. Vanessa watched this. She watched him hold his daughter in the middle of this room they'd built together, this room full of people who could now enter it, and she thought about what Lily had said in the study months ago, matter-of-factly, as children said the things that mattered. You help, and then they help back. That's how it works, I think. That was how it worked. She put the locket in her pocket. It settled there the way it always did. The weight of it, the specific warmth, the weight of everything it carried that was not just silver. Around them, the community center went on being what it was. The children continued their game. The volunteers cleaned up the dessert table. Someone had put music on. Nothing particular, just something in the background, the way music worked in spaces like this. The building breathed with the warmth of people in it. And Vanessa Hart, 31 years old, billionaire, wheelchair user, CEO, daughter, friend, whatever this was, sat in the middle of all of it with the locket in her pocket and the man who'd picked it up standing beside her and the girl who'd understood all of it from the beginning, leaning against her father with her eyes half closed, and she felt, fully and without qualification and without the instinct to manage it down to something safer, that this was her life. This specific, imperfect, difficult, open life. She had not lost something and been compensated with something else. She had not traded one version of herself for another. She was the same person she had always been, inside the same continuous story, And the chair was part of that story, and so was the accident, and so were the 5 years of walls, and so was the locket, and the marble floor, and the man who had not stood still when everyone else did. There was no lesson she could give that would cover all of it. She had tried, in the months of interviews and press appearances, and the speech she gave without notes at this building's opening, to articulate what she'd come to understand, and she'd gotten close but never exact, because the exact version lived in the specific accumulation of small moments rather than in any statement you could make about them. But if she was going to try, if someone asked her what she had learned in the years between the accident and this November afternoon, she thought it would be something close to this: that the things you lose do not define the limit of your life, that what matters is not the inventory of what's been taken, but what you choose to do with what remains. That strength was not the absence of difficulty, but the decision, made daily and imperfectly, to keep moving through it, and that sometimes the most important thing that happens to you is not a dramatic event or a hard-won victory, but a small, unremarkable gesture. Someone crouching down on a marble floor, someone handing back what you dropped, someone treating you like the ordinary person you are rather than the extraordinary circumstance they'd decided you were. She had been seen. That was it. She had been looked at directly and seen. And from that one ordinary act of being seen, she had found her way back into the world she'd been hiding from, and built a thing that mattered, and let someone get close enough to matter back. She picked up the locket herself. That was the part she would carry. Lily made it 12 more minutes before the wall arrived, and Ryan carried her to the car while she slept against his shoulder, and Vanessa followed them out through the building's main entrance, down the ramp that was right, through the door that was weighted correctly, into the November evening where the air was cold and the light was going, and somewhere to the west the water was doing what the water always did, indifferent and constant and there. She put her hand in her pocket. The locket was there. She kept moving.